going to get started, and I want to welcome everybody. Thank you for coming. I know this is a late evening. You're taking time out of your busy schedule to join us, so thank you. For those of you who don't know who I am, I'm Dr. Deb. I'm your speaker tonight, and we're going to be discussing the importance and often misunderstood topic of mold and mycotoxin illness. I think it's really important to discuss this because it is a bigger problem than it has ever been before. And it's something that we're seeing more frequently than we ever have as well. Now, I'm an expert in the field of environmental health and integrative medicine. I have extensive experience in diagnosing and treating mold-related illnesses. Over the past 25 years, I've dedicated my career to understanding the complex interactions between environmental factors and health. I have an expertise in a wide range of areas, including mold exposure, mycotoxin illness, chronic inflammatory response syndrome, so SEERS, Lyme, neurological diseases, and infertility caused by infection or environmental illness. I'm also an expert in hormonal imbalances, especially when they're caused by traumatic brain injury, or non-traumatic brain injury is what we usually call brain inflammation that's been caused by infection or mold and toxins. And I've helped over 12,000 clients restore their health in the past 13 years. I've been practicing for over 25 years. I currently own Serenity Health Care Center. That's my own practice, which I established in 2011. Prior to that, I co-owned another integrative medical practice with two other medical doctors in Waukesha here for about 10 years prior to. My mentor, Dr. Konetsky, Wayne Konetsky, was a pioneer in his time. He started practicing environmental medicine in the 70s. So long before it was popular, he was already doing this type of medicine. And that's kind of crazy to think about, because I hear patients talk now that back in the 70s, they didn't have anybody. And today we take it for granted that we have people everywhere. But back then we truly didn't have anybody. And so Dr. K was one of the first, and I had the luxury of learning from him. And he is still alive today at 93 years old and going strong. So I'm very grateful to him for introducing me to environmental medicine. I've published numerous articles and conducted research that sheds light on mechanisms of mycotoxin illness and effective treatment protocols. I have a new book coming out this year that I'm really excited about on misdiagnosed MS. So watch for that this fall. And tonight I'm going to provide some general information on treatment of mycotoxins, but in our office, we use a personalized treatment plan to make significant impact on the lives of our patients. We provide hope and healing where conventional treatments have fallen short. Now, I do need to make a disclaimer that I'm not providing any individual medical information to anybody. It's generalized information, but there is going to be a lot of juicy details in here. So get a pen and paper, take some notes, and then we're going to delve into the intricacies of mold and mycotoxin illness. We're going to cover a couple of different things. We're going to cover sources and types of molds and mycotoxins commonly found in our environments. We're going to evaluate and learn how these toxins affect our health and how they contribute to chronic illnesses. We're going to look at diagnostic methods and how to accurately identify mold and mold-related illnesses. And then we're going to go over comprehensive treatment strategies, including dietary interventions, supplements, medications, and environmental modifications. So we've got a lot to cover here. And I want to encourage all of you to take full advantage of tonight's lecture. I've prepared about an hour and a half to 2 hours. So bear with me. Like I said earlier, if you have to step away, go ahead, leave your camera on so you don't get kicked off if we hit our max. But we will do a recording of this. We'll send the recording out to everybody in the next couple of days, so you will have that available as well. And then go ahead, put your questions in the chat. I'll try to monitor the chat. And then at the end, I'll go ahead and I'll answer all of the questions. So I'll be here as long as you guys need me to with questions. We'll get everybody taken care of tonight. So that being said, let's get started. So mold is a very common issue that can significantly impact indoor air quality and health. And oftentimes we forget about the indoor air quality portion of things. Understanding the common sources of mold can help in the prevention and effective management. Tonight, we're going to explore the typical places where mold thrives both indoors and outdoors. So, in our indoor environments, the common places that we see things are bathrooms, kitchens, basements, crawl spaces, very high humidity areas. Bathrooms have a lot of humidity and they're very prone to growing mold due to that humidity. So, if you don't have a ventilator that's working, you're going to have more issues with mold. We really recommend that you have a mold humidifier with proper ventilation going out of the house. Older buildings, oftentimes they ventilate directly into the attic. So you want to make sure that that ventilation is going outside the house, not into the attic, because then you'll create moisture in the attic. And that's where you'll grow mold. So with that ventilation, you don't want a system that turns off when you turn your lights off in the bathroom. You want one that runs separately. So whenever it detects the humidity in the environment is getting high, it automatically turns on its own. That's a better system because oftentimes we're going in and out of our rooms and conserving electricity. We're turning off the lights. If you hop out of the shower and you're only in there for a few minutes and you turn off that light and it turns off the vent, you're not completely eliminating that moisture source. So you really want to get rid of that moisture source in the bathroom. It's common for mold to grow on tiles and grout around the sink and the shower. I know tile is beautiful these days and it's super popular and it makes our houses more expensive, but it is a solid place where mold likes to grow. It's a porous substance. So you have to clean that tile and that grout very often and well to keep that mold from growing. Even if you have a stand-up shower or you have a tub that has a sliding door on it, inside those metal rails, when you see that discolored kind of orangish buildup, that's mold growing in there. So you want to make sure that you remove that as best you can and as quickly as you can. Kitchens also are very well known for mold. We have food, we have live sources, we have humidity from the heat of the oven and the stove. And if we don't have a ventilator above the stove, we're not moving that moisture out of the kitchen fast enough. So that can build up. We almost all have dishwashers these days. Dishwashers are another place that we can have a lot of mold be created. If unfortunately you have a leak behind that dishwasher, you can have issues. We all know how hot the dishwasher can get when we turn that on. Depending on what kind of countertop you have, mold can actually grow on that porous substance if it's not a stone substance. So it's a particle board or it's a composite. Mold can grow on the back side of that from just that heat and that steam. So making sure that those appliances are kept up properly, they're sealed properly, can make a big difference in reducing the mold buildup that grows in the kitchen. Basements are very, very moldy. They're damp, they're moist, they're underground. Oftentimes we don't have windows in the basement, so there's no sunlight that comes in. If you have a home that's on a crawl space and is a dirt crawl space, you are naturally going to have mold growing in that dirt. There's not much we can do about that unless you put a foundation underneath there. You can seal it. There's different sealing products that you can put on top of the dirt that makes it hard. Many of them that we use for that, they use commercially in parks to make the pathways hard so that you can walk on them. The downside to that is it doesn't last a long period of time. It only lasts a couple of years and then you have to seal it again. Oftentimes people will recommend putting insulation and plastic over that, but you have to be very cautious with that because that's going to just create more moisture in the dirt and trap those mold spores there. And if you have varmints that get underneath there and they break that plastic open, those mold spores are going to start to be released more and they're going to start to grow on the floor joists of your home. And that wood then can be permeated through to the house. So we have to be very cautious about that. Attics are also very specific places for mold. Usually because our roofs leak over time, the roofs get bad, you have a leak, it comes into the attic. We fix the roof, but we don't look at what happened in the attic. And attics, unless they're vented, they're very hot, they're very moist in there, there's insulation in there. And so you have to be very cautious about that if you have a roof leak. You want to make sure that it's properly ventilated and we're not trapping any heat in there. Then we have our outdoor environments where we have soils and plants, our natural reservoirs. Mold naturally occurs in the soil and on decaying plant matter. Our garden areas have a lot of composite piles and debris. We have a lot of plant debris such as leaves, organic matter. All of this accumulates moisture and supports mold growth. It's just the natural process. Wood piles or mulch are notorious for mold. So if you have mulch spread out around your home as a decoration, we're going to see a lot of mold grow in there. And if you have any kind of problem with your foundation or that mulch is up too high, close to the wood or just underneath where your vinyl siding is, that mold can very easily get into the building that way as well. Other areas in the house that we need to be concerned about for mold is our HVAC systems. Our ductwork actually can grow mold. And in our air conditioning units, we can grow mold, especially if they're not regularly maintained and cleaned because there's always moisture on the air conditioning units. They're very commonly growing mold these days. You can also grow mold on the filters and on the coils, especially if the filters become damp or the coils are damp, they harbor mold, which can then be transmitted throughout the entire house through our ventilation system. So it's really important to have your vents cleaned on a regular basis. It doesn't have to be every year, but every couple of years, have somebody come in, clean your vents. They can actually test for mold inside your vents, and then you'll know if you have an issue. You can also test your filter if you're concerned that there's mold in your HVAC system. You can cut away a little piece of the filter that's inside the HVAC system, and you can send that out to the lab and they can determine if there's mold there or not. And we usually recommend if people have remediated to test their HVAC filter before the remediation, then do the remediation, let things settle for a couple of weeks, and then retest that filter after it's been filtering through that air. And then that will tell you if the remediation was clean or not, if it was complete. And if it wasn't complete, you're going to find mold in that filter again. And then you need to go looking for another source, or call that remediation company back and let them know that they didn't get all the mold. Windows and windowsills are common for mold, especially if they're older in nature. When they accumulate with condensation, particularly in the colder months, we're going to see that mold build up on the sills and the frames, and it's usually black in nature. The other place we'll see a lot of mold is carpets and furniture, believe it or not. You want to make sure you're not getting spills or flooding or high humidity in these areas where you have carpet and where you have upholstered furniture, because you can have a lot of mold growth there. And you can actually test your furniture and test the carpet for mold by using a mold plate. And you can take a Petri dish mold plate, turn it upside down, tap it onto the carpet or tap it onto the furniture, and then seal that off and send it to the lab, and they'll tell you if there's mold in that upholstered furniture or carpet, and then you will know that that place is a mold source and you have to remediate that, or you have to remove that from the environment so you're not continuing to contaminate your environment after you've remediated. Molds can be found both indoors and outdoors, like we just talked about. They thrive in a warm, damp, and humid condition. Bathrooms, kitchens, basements, we've talked about that already. Poor ventilation, water damage, leaks, or flooding can contribute to mold growth inside your building. If you have a leak under your kitchen sink or under your bathroom sink, that is a very common place for us to see mold growth. Even though you wipe it up and you dry it out, you have to really watch that area to make sure that mold is not growing in there. Because that area is usually contained inside of a cabinet, there's going to be more moisture. So when you find that leak, make sure you leave those doors open, get a fan in there, dry it completely out. And then I'll give you some tips on how you can actually treat that area a little bit later in the lecture. Outdoor, we commonly find mold, as we said, in our soil, in decaying plants, gardens, and leaves. And if you're somebody who has a lot of plants in your environment, in your home, we're going to see a lot of mold growth inside those plants as well. And that mold in the soil can still make you sick. It can still emit mycotoxins. So if you're mold sensitive, we usually recommend that you don't have a lot of plants in your environment, because as that sensitivity is there, it can make you more sensitive. We also want to look at the outside. You can see here there's a picture of siding that has mold growing on it. Typically, you're going to see this happen in a part of your house that's more shaded, where there's not a lot of sun, where it stays moist and damp. You want to definitely be cleaning this off, because this can seep into your house as well. And at the very least, when you're around that outdoor mold, planting, digging, cleaning things up, you're getting exposed to that mold mycotoxin. And if you're sensitive to this, it can make you really sick as well. Now, here are some foods that we may all love, but they are very contaminated with molds. Grains, nuts, spices, cheese, especially our brick hard cheese. This is blue cheese here. I know people love blue cheese, but blue cheese is nothing more than molded milk. And it may taste really well, but if you're sensitive to mold, this is not a product that you want to consume. You want to make sure you keep those things out. And we'll talk a little bit more about diet a little bit later as well. But keep in mind that mold sensitive people need to have a different diet than the traditional person. So let's talk about mycotoxins. Mycotoxins are crucial for recognizing and addressing the health risks associated with mold exposure. Mycotoxins are secondary metabolites produced by molds or fungi that can cause disease and even death in humans and in animals. And unlike the molds themselves, which can be visible, mycotoxins are often invisible and can contaminate food, air, and surfaces. When you walk into a building and you smell that musty, kind of grandma-like environment, right? Most of the time, what we think we're smelling is mold. Mold doesn't have a smell. Mycotoxins have the odor. So if there's mycotoxins present, you're going to smell that musty, moldy, damp smell. And it's those mycotoxins that are really going to cause problems for you. So mycotoxins are produced by a variety of species of mold, including Aspergillus, Penicillium, Fusarium, and Stachybotrys. And each type of mold produces different mycotoxins. So for example, Aspergillus produces aflatoxins and Stachybotrys produces trichothazines. And mycotoxins can be found in both indoor and outdoor environments, and they're commonly present in damp and water damaged buildings, but they're also present in contaminated foods like grains, nuts, dried fruits, and other agricultural settings. Most of these types of foods are stored in grain bins, and those grain bins sit for long periods of time. And unless they dry them completely, these foods are going to be contaminated with mold. Nuts, seeds, all those things that we say are great for us are commonly moldy. So any nut that doesn't have a shell on it, if you're mold sensitive, you should not be consuming it. If you love peanuts and you're like me, I love to suck on the outside of the salty peanut shell and then break it open and eat the peanut inside. That is the worst thing to do, because it's the peanut shell itself that contains the mold, not necessarily the peanut inside the shell. The shell is protecting the peanut itself. So some of those peanuts are good, but if you're getting peanuts that are already shelled, they are going to be more contaminated with mold and mycotoxins. So mycotoxins are highly toxic secondary metabolites produced by molds, and they can cause a wide range of adverse health effects in humans and animals. In acute poisoning and long-term health issues such as cancer and immune suppression is what we see when people are exposed to mycotoxins. These mycotoxins are chemically stable, meaning they can withstand processing and environmental conditions that would normally degrade other organic compounds. The stability makes them persistent contaminants in food and indoor environments. They are oftentimes heat resistant and can survive cooking and food processing. And the characteristic poses a significant challenge for food safety, as contaminated food products may remain toxic even after they've been cooked. Mycotoxins they vary in their solubility, and some of the soluble in water, while others are soluble in organic solvents. So the solubility affects the way they spread in the environment and how they can be removed or detoxified. And that's why it takes multiple different products to detox mycotoxins from the body, and why some people have an easier time doing it than others. Mycotoxins also have diverse chemical structures, which include aflatoxins, trichothazines, ochratoxin, and fusarium. And each type has a unique property and health effects complicating detection and management. These mycotoxins can interfere with various biological processes, and they can inhibit protein synthesis and disrupt our cellular membranes and induce oxidative damage, leading to cell damage and what we call apoptosis, which is just a big word for programmed cell death. And in some cases, that cell death is good, but if we have too much of that, that's not a good thing. So understanding the characteristics of which mycotoxins we're dealing with is crucial for managing those risks. And their toxicity, their chemical stability, their heat resistance, their diverse chemical structures, and biological activity all contribute to their potential harm and challenges in detecting and eliminating them from our bodies and our environments. So let's talk about some symptoms that we see when we're exposed to mycotoxins. So in an acute poisoning of mycotoxins, you're going to see nausea, vomiting, abdominal pain, and diarrhea. This typically happens when we ingest mycotoxins from contaminated foods with very high levels of mycotoxins, specifically aflatoxins. And you'll see this happen more commonly in people who consume peanuts and corn. There are a lot of chronic health issues that happen with mycotoxin exposure. Long-term exposure to aflatoxins can lead to liver cancer and cirrhosis of the liver. Kidney damage typically happens from ochratoxins, and we know that if we don't have good kidney function and somebody has mycotoxin illness, it's going to be harder for us to eliminate their toxins, but it is nephrotoxic. So it's toxic to the kidneys, and it can cause kidney cancer. We will often see respiratory issues. That's very common, that coughing, wheezing, asthma-like symptoms. And typically this is caused by us inhaling the mold spores and the mycotoxins. And this oftentimes comes from damp environments, whether it's in a home or we're walking near a stream or by the water or in the woods. Those kinds of things, when we inhale it, oftentimes you'll see people start coughing immediately. They can have neurotoxic effects as well. So headaches, dizziness, cognitive impairment, memory loss, word finding, and certain mycotoxins such as trichothazines can affect the central nervous system and present oftentimes like MS or ALS. We will see skin irritation and rashes, dermatitis, especially if somebody is colonized with mold in their nose and then they get an outside exposure, like they're pulling weeds and then they have an exposure to mold that way. You'll see a lot of hives, a lot of rashes, even some anaphylactic reaction where they can't breathe from that. And typically that's triggered because they are colonized in their mold and they have another exposure that's pretty severe. Cancer is our number one concern when people are exposed to mold. Aflatoxins cause liver cancer, ochratoxins cause kidney cancer, and there's possibly other cancers that we will see when people are exposed to mycotoxins. And in part, this happens because of what these mycotoxins do to our immune system and how they change our DNA. So mycotoxins, this illness can be very severe. It can affect multiple organs, and we really need to bring awareness and prevention from mycotoxin exposure. It's very sad that people don't take mycotoxin illness seriously. And when we see mold in the house, or our landlords, we talk to them about mold and they don't take us seriously. This can really create a lot of problems for us. We'll also see mycotoxins weaken the immune system, making individuals more susceptible to infection and disease like cancer, because the immune system then cannot see the cancer cells and can't blow them up like they're supposed to. And we can actually see people develop something called aspergillosis in the lungs, and they can get mold inside the lungs, which is a very severe disease. People can die from this. It's not regularly treated. It's not regularly tested by our conventional doctors, and very, very difficult to diagnose. So mycotoxins are a type of phospholipid, so they're a type of fat, which makes them persistent in the environment. And due to the heavy nature of the mycotoxin itself, it's easy for these mycotoxins to attach to dust particles and stay around in our environment for a longer period of time. Mold that produces mycotoxins, they do this as a defense mechanism when they're threatened to ensure their survival. All mycotoxins are harmful. Not one mycotoxin is safe to be around. And when it's absorbed through the lungs by us breathing it in, it's actually considered a bioweapon. And unlike mold, mycotoxins don't have a smell. Like I said before, mold doesn't have the smell. It's the toxins that are released from the mold that have the odor that's making us sick. So sometimes when people test for mold and mold doesn't show up, but they know the environment is bad, it's because they need to test for the mycotoxins, not just the mold itself. So if you smell a musty odor but can't see mold, it indicates that there's a problem in that area, and it could be either active or past. And I'll talk to you about how you determine how it's active and past when we look at some testing here. So mold is a living organism that can thrive both indoor and outdoors, like we had talked about, particularly in water damaged buildings. And it plays a natural role in breaking down that organic matter. But when it invades our home and our workplaces, it causes significant health issues. They estimate that 85% of the buildings in this country are inflicted with mold. And if they have mold, I would bet that probably 78 to 80% of them actually have mycotoxins as well. So there are different molds that grow on different materials. So in drywall, we commonly find molds that are penicillin and Stachybotrys. Stachybotrys is often known as that black mold, and we used to think that was the only one that was really severe enough to make us sick, but that's not true. All of these mycotoxins can make us sick. These molds are going to thrive in that cellulose material in the drywall, especially when it becomes wet, and it's going to continue to grow. And if it grows through the drywall, it can infect your insulation, and it can get on your 2x4s inside of your walls, and it can spread very rapidly. It also likes wood and windowsills typically grow cladosporium mold. And that's frequently grown in that area, often due to that moisture buildup and that condensation. So cladosporium is that black mold as well. So normally when we see black mold, we automatically think it's Stachybotrys. But on the windowsills, you know, you always see that black thing when there's moisture there. That's actually cladosporium. Aspergillus and chaetimonium are molds that can grow on concrete surfaces. And these molds are resilient, and they can survive in really porous structures such as concrete, particularly if that concrete stays damp. That's why basements are so problematic for us. And you want to make sure that if your basement smells musty or feels damp, to put a dehumidifier down there. And you want your dehumidifier to have an ability to set a percentage. You want it 50%, no greater than 50% moisture in that basement. Anything lower than 50%, mold has a very difficult time growing. Now, oftentimes you'll see ceiling tiles that'll have that water stain on there. That is typically a fusarium mold that grows on those ceiling tiles. Fusarium also grows inside of our air ducts, and that mold can spread rapidly in the air ducts with that high humidity and poor ventilation. The heat helps to kill the mold, but when you turn the air conditioning on, then it's cool and it's moist, and that can cause that mold to grow more often. When we remediate or we remodel buildings that have had mold in them, that completely disrupts the mold spores and the fragments, and they can actually remain in the structure. So even though somebody's coming in and they do your remediation and they say all the mold is gone and you still don't feel well, it's because there's still mycotoxins there. You have to scrub the air and clean the air from those mycotoxins because you've now disrupted those fragments and they've been released into the air and they cause a poisoning in the body. And it's risky to the occupants that are there when they're moving those molds and shortly after they're moving those molds, unless you've cleaned that up. When you inhale the spores, it can lead to that respiratory issue. It can lead to that allergic response and then lead to other health conditions. So understanding the different environments where mold can grow can really help us identify and mitigate the potential mold problems. Regular maintenance, proper ventilation, addressing water damage as soon as we see that it's there, all help to prevent that mold growth and ensure a healthy indoor environment. Also, keeping that humidity level 50% or less helps to reduce that moisture in the building and helps to prevent that mold growth. Sorry, I'm just going to take a drink here. How's this for everybody? Is this helpful? You guys feeling like this is good? I know it's a lot, but that's why we're having it recorded for you guys so you can listen to it again. So now we're going to get into a little bit more of what happens to the body when we're exposed to mold. So when we first come in contact with mold, the primary entry point is through our airway, respiratory. We breathe that in. Those spores are inhaled and initially taking it into the cells where enzymes begin to try to process them. And then the body's defense mechanism comes in and tries to kill the mold, and the immune system activates a secondary defense. And this sends out what we call exosomes. So if you've heard people talk about exosomes and stem cells, that's actually what our bodies are producing as a way to try to target and kill those mold spores. So for an example, when we're exposed to molds such as Stachybotrys, they can have very specific effects on the body. Stachybotrys is known to alter phospholipids, which are essential components of cell membranes, and they potentially lead to cellular damage and disruption of our normal cell function. And so the body has multiple defense mechanisms to combat the mold exposure, starting with that enzyme production, then creating the exosomes. And then if that's still inefficient, then the body will potentially start to address that mold in a different way. But if it can't do it properly, those phospholipids are going to be damaged, which is then going to lead to mitochondria damage. And mitochondria is just a big word for cell structure, but it is the energy to our cells. So when mold starts to disrupt the mitochondria, this is where we start to have problems with fatigue and memory, that chronic fatigue, that chronic inflammation that we see. And when that sets in, we have a difficult time making something called plasmalogens. And plasmalogens are cells, structures that can cross the blood-brain barrier, help reduce the inflammation in our brain, and help to reduce neurological conditions like MS, ALS, dementia, and Alzheimer's disease. When the mitochondria is damaged from mold or toxins or infection like Lyme, one of the first things that happens is the mitochondria starts to become challenged. And the longer we're sick with this, the more damage that happens on the mitochondrial level, the more problems we're going to start to see with these neurological conditions. We cannot get plasmalogens from our food sources, so it has to be replaced, unfortunately. Okay, whoops, I'm going to just go back. I thought I had another piece on this slide. Mold exposure can trigger a complex immune response called mast cell activation, or MCAS. And MCAS is a condition where mast cells which are part of the immune system, release excessive amounts of inflammatory mediators, leading to a variety of symptoms, primarily allergy type symptoms. So when we're exposed to mold, the body triggers something called IgE, or what we call immunoglobulin E response. And that IgE antibodies typically are associated with allergic reactions. However, it's important to remember that it is not always an allergic reaction. It can also be an inflammatory reaction and an immune reaction. And this can cause other problems with different pathways in the body, creating that chemical sensitivity or that overreactivity, where we're just reacting to everything that we never reacted to before. We're reacting to foods, we're reacting to chemicals, shampoos, body lotions, everything that's in our environment, we start to become sensitive to because of this IgE reaction. Now, mold exposure can suppress the immune system, making it less effective at fighting off infections and creating other threats. And this suppression can lead to an increased susceptibility to mast cell, and the body overreacts to that mold antigen in an attempt to compensate for the weakened immune system. And that's what causes that overreactivity. Prolonged exposure to mold can result into what we call an IgG, or the immunoglobulin G deficiency. IgG antibodies play a crucial role in long-term immunity and pathogen neutralization. So in people who've had chronic infection, it's not uncommon for us to see a low IgG level. We'll see this quite often in kids with autism or PANS pandas. Their IgG is suppressed and their immune system cannot fight infection the way it's supposed to. So they're chronically in an infectious state and they're not able to overcome that infection. And this creates a hypersensitivity on the immune system to mold or other antigens, and this will make the mast cell even worse and make you more sensitive. This is where we'll see people who will say, I can only tolerate 3 or 4 foods. If I eat anything more than that, I'm having a reaction. Sometimes it's an oral allergy syndrome where they'll feel itching or burning in their mouth. They'll actually feel like their throat's closing. Sometimes it's a different histamine reaction that they'll get. They'll get hives, they'll get itching in their body, they'll get brain fog. There's a whole host of things they can get. A lot of GI disruption from that high histamine can happen as well. So it's really important when we have this long-term exposure to mycotoxins or other toxins that can cause mast cell, to treat the mycotoxins and treat the reason that's causing the mast cell. If you don't address the cause, the mast cell will never go away. All right, so let's talk about mold colonization. Mold colonization's been around for a really long time, but there hasn't been a lot of great treatments until maybe the last 10 years. And we have very few practitioners that believe that mold can colonize in the nasal passages. And this makes it difficult for us to identify mold colonization. So Dr. Dennis is a renowned expert in the environmental medicine world. He's extensively researched this. He's an ENT plastic surgeon out of Atlanta. And he is one of the only ENTs that understands that the nose can colonize with mold, and you can continue to be your own little mold factory, even though you're out of a moldy environment, and what's growing in your nose can still make you sick. So nasal mold colonization refers to the persistent growth of mold within that nasal cavity and the sinus cavity. So unlike a transient exposure, colonization involves mold establishing itself in the mucosal lining. I personally experienced this. I had mold growing in my sinus cavity, never realized it. And I saw Dr. Dennis last year for sinus surgery. It's actually a year this week. I can't believe it. And he removed a golf ball size fungal capsule from my sinus cavity. And I had hardly any symptoms, a little sinus drainage, a little postnasal drip, but that was about it. And once he removed that, it was amazing how much energy I had, how much better I felt, how much inflammation went away. And I saw one of the best local ENTs here in Wisconsin and said, I suspect I have fungal colonization in my nose. And she was pleasant about it, but basically said, no, if you had that, you'd be almost dead. And did a scope in her office and said, I don't see anything. It's fine. I'll do a CT. Lo and behold, the CT comes back. And the only thing she's worried about is a deviated septum. I go to see Dr. Dennis. He looks at my CT and says, oh my God, I can see the fungal ball right here. Does the same scope in the office, can see the fungal ball in his office. And my question to him was, why didn't the other ENT see it? And he said, she shouldn't be practicing. That was his exact words. And he said, they are trained to look for fungus. They know it's there. They'll clean it up, but they'll never tell people that you had fungus in your sinus cavity because they don't think that it creates any kind of chronic problem. But it really creates a big problem for people if they continue to be ill. We have to rule out whether or not there's nasal colonization there. So mold spores actually enter into the nasal passages through us breathing in, right? So once they're inside the mucosal area, they adhere to the lining of the nose and the sinuses. And because there's such a beautiful environment for growth, it's dark, it's moist, we feed it, it's warm. It just can continue to grow in there very, very easily. And this mold can also create something that we call biofilms. Biofilms are the protective layer that can make colonies more resistant to the body's immune response and can prevent us from adhering to that treatment and letting that treatment actually get to where it needs to be. And so you'll develop chronic sinusitis, nasal congestion, postnasal drip, and these symptoms typically are very persistent. And because that mold continues to trigger an inflammatory response, you will continue to be sicker and sicker with mold colonization. It can contribute to the systemic mycotoxin exposure, which leads to fatigue, headaches, cognitive impairment, systemic symptoms, neurological issues like MS, ALS, dementia. And because they suppress the immune system, they're going to make you more susceptible to infection, cancer, and other problems as well. So one of the ways that we identify whether or not somebody has mold in their sinus cavity is by doing a nasal swab. We swab the inside of the nose and we send it out for a test called Marcons. And that looks for a very specific bacteria, a resistant staph bacteria. And they can also look to see if there's any fungal overgrowth in there. Now, fungal growth is very difficult to determine on a nasal swab. So if we see it, we know it's a major problem, but it doesn't always grow fungus. And just because it doesn't grow fungus doesn't mean that it's not there. It just may be that we didn't see it because we couldn't get high enough up. It could be higher in the sinus cavity, and we just can't reach that spot with the swab. We also do a CT, and that CT will show us if there's a blockage in the sinus cavity. And if there's a blockage in the sinus cavity, most likely it's going to be fungal in nature, especially if you have other tests that show that you have been exposed to mycotoxins or mold. So some of the things that we use to treat this, if there's mold in the sinus cavity, is nasal antifungals. So we can use things like amphotericin B or itraconazole in a nasal spray. They put it into a bottle, you put it inside the nose, you spray it. You can also put it into a device called a Rhino Clear Sprint, and that delivers a very fine mist, and that mist will get up into the upper sinus cavity and not just stay inside the nose. And it's much better. The higher you can get it up, the finer mist you can get it into, the better success we're going to have with killing it with those nasal sprays. We can also use essential oils in those nasal passages. We can use colloidal silver in those passages. We can use xylitol in those passages. If there's bacteria there, we're going to put different antibiotics in there. That's what's called bag spray. There's different formulations depending on which types of bacteria we see. And if that bacteria is resistant to certain antibiotics, then we change up that formula to match what it's susceptible to and what it's not. You can also do what's called nasal irrigation, neti pot, Navage. I love the Navage because it's an enclosed device. Neti pot gets a little messy. You know, it's in one side, it's out the other, it's running down your face. It's just kind of obnoxious. So the Navage is better because it's a closed device and you put it upside into the nasal passages, push the button, and it runs through very quickly. You typically use saline in there to rinse that nose with. You can put some colloidal silver in there. You can also put iodine in there to flush that through your sinuses to kill different things. If you're going to use iodine, we usually recommend you use something called SSKI iodine and just put like 1 or 2 drops into the Navage water and then put your saline in there, close that up and just flush that through. And that works really, really great as well. And if people suffer from a lot of sinus drainage and congestion, it's really great to just move all of that out of there, get that junk. If you've been exposed to mold, unfortunately, say you walked into a gas station and you were like, oh my God, this place is moldy, that this is a really great thing to have Navage on hand to flush those sinuses immediately. If you're out and about and you don't have it, there's a little vial of iodine that you can use. You can make it yourself if you want to, or they have something called RX Cofix, COIFRX, I believe it is. It's a little bitty bottle. You can carry it with you. I usually tell people, go to the dollar store, get a vial of your saline nasal spray, get a vial of cheap iodine, put 8 to 10 drops of iodine into your saline rinse bottle. You can take the top off, put it in there, shake it up, carry it with you. Then that way, if you get exposed to mold, you can spray your nose right away. It kills the mold on contact and it's not growing in your sinus, and then you're not getting it systemically. It'll really help control that environment for you, make it easier for you so you feel a lot better. In really severe cases where we've tried the nasal sprays, it's not working, or there's a blocked sinus, then sinus surgery is necessary to remove that fungus from the sinus cavity. Okay, let's delve into the specific health effects caused by mycotoxins. Particularly, we're going to focus on the trichothazines, the stachybotrys, and their broader impact of the body. Bladder issues are extremely common in people who've been exposed to mycotoxins from molds, especially trichothazines and stachybotrys. They lead to bladder issues. They lead to irritation of the bladder lining, causing urinary frequency, urgency, discomfort, spasms are common. And chronic exposure to this can exacerbate these symptoms and lead to more severe bladder conditions as well. All mycotoxins have the potential to damage the mitochondria, which is the energy producing organelles of our cell. That is why people who have mold illness are fatigued. They're so tired, they cannot push through. The more you have exposure to mold, the more mitochondrial damage you're going to have, the more fatigue you're going to have. So we really need to focus on building that mitochondria and repairing that mitochondria damage. This also can lead to muscle weakness and spasming. So when people talk about, you know, my muscles are so tired, I can't recover from just walking to the mailbox. I can't recover from walking around the block. This is because the mitochondria has been damaged. And we have to rebuild that mitochondria so that your body can function properly. Mycotoxins also reduce levels of glutathione, and glutathione is a critical antioxidant that protects cells from oxidative stress and supports that detoxification pathway. It is one of the #1 things that we need to get these mycotoxins out, secondary to the liver. So because these mycotoxins disrupt glutathione, it has to be part of the protocol when you're treating mycotoxin illness so that you have enough of it to release these mycotoxins. Mycotoxins also manifest their effects on the skin and the hair, causing deeper systemic issues. But a lot of times this is the first sign that somebody's having issues because their hair will become damaged. It'll be thin, it'll be brittle, it'll start falling out. And then this is a big sign. And oftentimes we'll make excuses for it being other things, but it should be something that's on our radar to say, wait a minute, we need to look at this. Maybe there's some toxin there that's causing this problem to happen. Prolonged exposure to mycotoxins can lead to human DNA changes, and this genetic impact can potentially increase the risk of various chronic diseases, cancer and autoimmune diseases again. And we need to understand and recognize that early exposure to mycotoxins so we can prevent that long-term risk factor. Okay, we're going to dive into specific molds and mycotoxins and what they cause and what they create now. I hope everybody's doing okay. I know this is heavy, but I hope it's really helpful for you guys. If you're coming up with questions, feel free, write them down. You can plop them in the chat. I can't see the chat right now. So again, I will go through them. But if you want to write them down and put them in later, feel free. But if you got to get them out, just go ahead and put them in the chat. So aflatoxins are mycotoxins that are very much classified as carcinogens. They've been shown to contribute to liver cancer and other types of cancer. So we know this particular mold is cancer causing. It also activates Epstein-Barr virus, and that's the virus that causes mono. It can activate it and lead us to symptoms like fatigue, fever, sore throat, and swollen lymph nodes, and it can contribute to chronic health issues if reactivated repeatedly. It can affect the liver, and the liver is particularly vulnerable to aflatoxins, and that's primarily due to its role of detox. And the aflatoxin can impair liver function, leading to reduced ability to the body's detoxification pathways, and it can cause symptoms of liver dysfunction, such as jaundice, that yellowing of the skin, fatigue, abdominal pain, and elevated liver enzymes. Aflatoxins also have significant impact on the immune system. They decrease the ability to defend against infection and disease, and that suppression can lead to increased susceptibility to other infections, slower healing, and higher risks of autoimmune diseases as well. And the overall weakening of that immune system makes individuals more susceptible and vulnerable to other complications, as well as other cancers. Okay, I'm going to slaughter the name of this mold, and I don't know who comes up with these names of molds because they're pretty crazy sometimes, but Chaetoglobson, this is a mold that significantly concerns us because it crosses the blood-brain barrier, and it's capable and allows in that direct effect of the central nervous system, so it can create a lot of neurological problems for us: headaches, dizziness, cognitive dysfunction, memory issues, numbness, tingling, ALS, MS symptoms, things like that. This mold also impacts our respiratory system and can cause severe lung issues. When it's inhaled, and that's typically how we get this to start with, you're going to get significant coughing, shortness of breath, and chronic respiratory infection or chronic asthma-like symptoms. And prolonged exposure to this mold can cause severe lung damage and respiratory disease. You can see thickening of the lungs, like a fibrosis can happen, which can be pretty problematic. It creates apoptosis, so that cell death, it goes in and explodes those cells, which normally we would say is good. However, with this particular mold, it can create apoptosis to continue in the body and not stop. And that overproduction of killing cells can really be a problem and can damage the other cells and can lead to tissue and organ dysfunction or damage. And it can disrupt a lot of bodily systems and decline your overall health as well. It's been linked to cancer, contributing to the development of cancer and spread of cancer, and it can cause genetic mutations, interfering with the cell process. And the mycotoxin can promote the formation of actual growth tumors in the body. And it's important to recognize the risk and prevent long-term health consequences. So this particular mold is quite frightening, especially as we're seeing that rise of autoimmune disease. We're seeing that rise of ALS. They're predicting ALS in the next 10 years to go up to almost 30–40%. And if we have people that are exposed to molds and mycotoxins, that number can go much higher even. Okay, so let's look at citrinin. Citrinin is a mycotoxin produced by fungi such as penicillin, aspergillus, and monosuccus. Mycotoxins are commonly stored in grains. This particular one is stored in grains, cereals, and agricultural products. It produces kidney damage. It's highly nephrotoxic. It targets and damages the kidney, and prolonged exposure can lead to actual renal dysfunction and kidney failure. It is also liver toxic. It can cause the liver to have damaged cells and create cirrhosis of the liver. It is also immunosuppressive, so it can reduce that body's immune system to fight infection. It creates oxidative damage and stress, generating what we call free radicals, and this leads to cell damage and contributes to the development of chronic disease. It is also potentially carcinogenic, not like some of the other ones that we know. It can cause mutations and cellular damage and cancer. You're going to find citrinin commonly in contaminated foods, so rice, wheat, corn, and other grains. And overconsumption of these foods can really lead to chronic exposure. We'll also see this in agricultural settings. So people who work outdoors in the fields or they're harvesting, they're going to be much exposed to citrinin. So it's key to prevent this citrinin growth is proper storage of our grains and cereals in a dry, cool condition. Now, we don't have any control over that in the grain bins, but once it gets to our homes, we can take it out of its box. We can put it in a nice container so that it doesn't grow moisture, and that will help with that mycotoxin contamination there. All right, let's talk gliotoxin. Gliotoxin to me is the primary mold that we want to attack. It's also the scariest mold in some aspects because it lodges inside of the pituitary and it creates a lot of damage then in the brain, and it creates problems elsewhere in the body. It's produced primarily by aspergillus, but can also be produced by trichoderma and gliocladium. It's characterized by its bridge part of the EPT class of mycotoxins. It disrupts our mitochondria. It creates oxygen, reactive oxygen species, and it can lead to oxidative stress and, again, mitochondrial damage. So you'll find that a lot of these molds do the same thing. They all create mitochondrial damage. They all affect the immune system. They all affect the respiratory system. But this also can cause apoptosis through something called cytochrome C, and this is what activates that cell death pathway. Interestingly enough, gliotoxin decreases the IgG subclass 3. So this is a marker that we test to see how someone's immune system is functioning. Kids with autism, PANS-PANDAS, oftentimes have a low subclass 3, and until recently, we never looked at mold as being the culprit for this. We always thought it was infection. But now that we recognize that IgG subclass can be a problem, we need to be looking at mold because it reduces that immune function. It enhances inflammation and triggers what we call pro-inflammatory cytokines, and it can exacerbate autoimmune conditions by increasing the neuroinflammation, so inflammation in the brain. And we've seen that gliotoxin in studies of multiple sclerosis models is the culprit or can be a culprit for triggering MS. And sometimes it can actually be a misdiagnosis of MS if people have a lot of these mycotoxins. That's what's triggering their symptoms of MS. But if they don't truly have the positive spinal tap, the monoclonal antibodies, they don't necessarily have MS. They may have a toxin that's causing them to have these symptoms. Gliotoxin also causes something called gastroparesis. And that is where the stomach muscles are unable to move food efficiently, and it delays the stomach emptying. So it can create problems with nausea, vomiting, and bloating, constipation. It's that slower processing in the gut. It can also cause persistent candida. I've known people who've had candida for 40, 50 years, and they've never gotten over it. And part of that problem is nobody's ever tested them for other mycotoxins. So gliotoxin can add to that. It can make it much more difficult for you to get rid of candida, and create very similar symptoms of candida. So the bloating, the fatigue, fibromyalgia symptoms, brain fog, weight gain, things like that. Gliotoxin impacts the pituitary gland, which regulates our hormonal function. So our hormones oftentimes become disrupted when we're exposed to these mycotoxins and molds. It can put us into early menopause. It can disrupt testosterone. It can disrupt thyroid function. All of those things can be thrown off by these molds, and gliotoxin is a primary one of that because it gets into the pituitary. Gliotoxin is also known to exasperate mast cell, and it promotes the release of histamine and other inflammatory mediators. So it is what triggers that itching, swelling, allergic reaction type thing. When we start to treat mold, we want to start to get rid of gliotoxin first, because if we can stop gliotoxin in its tracks, we can stop a lot of those other mycotoxins from being created in the body on their own. Okay, ochratoxin A is a mycotoxin produced by Aspergillus primarily, but Penicillium as well. It's commonly also found in our food sources, cereals, coffee. Sorry, guys, coffee is so moldy. So if you're loving coffee, make sure you get a coffee that's been tested for mold. You know it's not contaminated with mold, because it can add to your symptoms of mycotoxin illness. Dried fruit. For those of you who love your wine, I love my wine, but I don't tolerate it. And I couldn't figure out why I didn't tolerate it. And I thought it was the sulfites. It's not the sulfites necessarily. For some people it is, but oftentimes it's because the grapes are contaminated with molds. And if we're not processing those molds well, we're not going to tolerate wine very well because of those contaminated grapes. We also see it in contaminated animal feed, which can actually lead to residues in our meat and dairy products as well. So this is where it becomes really essential to know where we're getting our animal products from. How are they being raised? How are they being fed? How are they being tested? What's going on? So if you can buy local, buy grass-fed, know your farmer, talk to them, you can reduce the risk of having these mycotoxins in your dairy products, in your meat as well. So ochratoxin A is also known as OTA, and it is highly nephrotoxic. So again, the kidneys, you'll see that over and over again. Mold has to be excreted by the kidneys. Mycotoxins have to be excreted by the kidneys, and they all affect the kidneys. Ochratoxin A can lead to renal failure, and that it can inhibit the body's ability to filter the mold and the mycotoxins through the bloodstream efficiently, because it's decreasing the effectiveness of the kidney function itself. Long-term exposure to ochratoxin A can cause kidney cancer. It can mutate the cells and can lead to the development of malignant tumors in the kidney as well. It also blocks protein synthesis and protein absorption by the body, and it can lead to various issues, including muscle wasting, weakened immune system, and those proteins are essential there are building blocks for everything in the body. So if we're not absorbing protein, we're not breaking it down, we're getting muscle wasting, we're getting problems with our mitochondria, we can't make plasmalogens. There's a whole bunch of problems that happen when we don't get enough protein and we can't process it. It also decreases glutathione, which we talked about. Glutathione is an essential antioxidant. It helps to detoxify the body, and it helps to neutralize those free radicals so that it decreases the damage in the cells. It is also toxic to neutrophils. Neutrophils are our white blood cells. It's essential for our immune response, and ochratoxin impairs their function and reduces the body's ability to fight infection. It can also disrupt our gene expression, interferes with both DNA and RNA, and it can disrupt the normal cellular process and development of diseases. We're very cautious in pregnant women about moving mycotoxins or toxins for that matter at all. And we try to tell women not to get pregnant if they have high levels of mycotoxins like this, because those mycotoxins can be passed to the unborn baby and can disrupt and damage their DNA and their RNA. You don't want to move these things while you're pregnant or while you're trying to get pregnant. Unfortunately, many women don't realize they have high mycotoxins when they get pregnant. And this is what can contribute to us having children that have neurological defects, autism, other chronic issues. So it's really important for us to know what's going on before pregnancy. Research actually indicates that ochratoxin A can cause very specific male cytotoxic effects on the RNA. And this could be potentially gender specific to men and some of the diseases that we see with their DNA as well. Okay, so let's talk about zearalenone, commonly known as Zen. It is a mycotoxin produced by several species of Fusarium. It is commonly found in cereals, crops, corn, wheat, barley, oats, and sorghum, so pretty much all the grains. And this contamination can occur in the field or during storage, and it is favorable for fungal growth. It is known as a xenoestrogen, which means it can produce very strong, powerful chemical estrogens. So zearalenone exposure is linked to infertility in both humans and animals. It interferes with our reproductive system, makes it difficult for people to conceive, both on the female side and the male side. It can lead to pregnancy loss, fertility, breeding issues in animals as well. It is an estrogenic mycotoxin, so it creates a very strong chemical estrogen. It disrupts the hormonal balance and can lead to endocrine dysfunction, can also lead to premature ovarian failure, early menopause. It can cause early onset puberty in young women and can affect their menstrual cycles. It can also lead to ovarian cysts, uterine enlargement. It can reduce sperm count, sperm quality, and it can cause the testicles to shrink or have atrophy. So both sexes can experience hormonal imbalances as a result of being exposed to Zen. Zen also has been associated with cardiovascular issues, including the development of ventricular heart block. It's a condition that can be impaired by the electrical signaling and can lead to irregular heartbeats. Oftentimes, people who are exposed to molds or mycotoxins will complain of irregular heartbeats, tachycardia, my heart's palpitating, it's racing, it feels weird. A lot of that can happen from different mycotoxins. So some of the sources we talked about a little bit: Zen contamination of grains, improper storage, cereals, feed contamination, agricultural settings. So if you're on the farm, you can get it inhaled by dust from these grains as well. So it can come from a lot of different sources. You want to make sure you're storing your grains in cool, dry places. Regularly, we should be testing our crops for these mycotoxins. That doesn't always happen, unfortunately. And again, this is where it comes back to saying we should know where we're buying our foods from, because this can make a big difference for us. Okay, so mycophenolic acid. Mycophenolic acid is a chemical derived and produced by mold, specifically the penicillium form. And unlike traditional mycotoxins, MPA is not classified as a mycotoxin. It shares similar characteristics of the term and impacts the environment. It's commonly seen in environments where mold lives and indicates whether or not there's live mold present in the environment. So when we're testing an environment or testing a person and we see MPA positive, we know that they've been exposed to live mold. If there's live mold, there's a mold problem. So if somebody says, I've remediated your house and it's fine, and you test your house and MPA is there, they didn't do proper remediation. And you've got to bring them back and they've got to find the live mold source, because if they don't, that mold is going to continue to grow and grow and grow. It's readily absorbed into the body through breathing, but also skin contact. And once it's absorbed, it's detoxified in the liver, but plays a crucial role in mitigating any potential harmful effects. It's been shown to alter lipid metabolism. So this can lead to a variety of metabolic issues and disrupts normal processing of storage of fats. So somebody who has very high cholesterol issues and they're not being well controlled with diet or lifestyle changes or even medication for that matter, we should be looking at this particular mold to see if they have this, because that could be their problem with their cholesterol issues. Mold loves to store in the body fat. This is why we see people who've been exposed to mold have a lot of weight gain, because it's a means to protect the organs by storing the mold in the fat to protect the liver and the kidneys and the lungs. So as you release these molds, you have to bind them, you have to get them out to protect the organs. But as you release them, then you typically will see the weight start to come off, unless there's been a lot of mitochondrial damage or we've had lipid metabolism damage, like now people have a type 2 diabetes as a result of this, then it can be more difficult to reverse that. We know MPA is immunosuppressive. It suppresses the immune system, and it can particularly be a problem in organ transplant. And this could be part of the reason we see organ rejections as well. That immune system is lower, and if there's these mycotoxins that are present, we've got a problem with you being able to retain that organ from someone else. It's also associated with what we call leaky gut syndrome, which is the breakdown of the intestinal lining, where it becomes more permeable. We call it microscopic holes in the intestinal lining. And then this allows your toxins to leak out and enter into the bloodstream, and it can lead to inflammation and other systemic health issues. MPA is also found in environments where there's active mold growth. It's essential, like I said, to find that mold source then. The liver plays a role in destroying MPA as it enters into the body, and it maintains the liver health, and especially individuals who are exposed to mold, we want to make sure that liver is processing things. We want to control the mold growth inside the environment, reduce the exposure to MPA. And this includes dry, clean conditions, addressing the water damage, and then regularly monitoring liver function and metabolic health to manage the impacts of what MPA can do. So this is where we'll look at leptin, we'll look at glucose, we'll look at hemoglobin A1C, we'll look at cholesterol panels, things like that, to see what's going on when somebody's been exposed to MPA. Okay, let's look at endotoxins. So endotoxins are substances that are bound to the cell wall. This is bacteria. Typically, we call it gram-negative bacteria that's released when the bacteria disintegrates. And these are commonly found in environments with wet mold, moldy environments. We suspect bacterial growth whenever there is mold. Usually where there's mold, there's bacteria. And this bacteria coexists in this damp environment, making what we call endotoxins. And the endotoxins are common in buildings with water damage or inadequate ventilation. And these endotoxins are sources of making us sick. You'll typically find them in stagnant water sources. So in water tanks, in pipes, they're an ideal breeding ground for bacteria, and that can lead to endotoxins. Endotoxins increase inflammation in the body. They interact with the immune system and activate what we call cytokines. So these are things like IL-8, IL-1, TNF-alpha, and C-reactive protein. And I'll go through each one of these for you guys too. IL-8 attracts neutrophils, which come to the infection site. So it's like white blood cells. They promote inflammation. IL-1 is an inflammatory response, which leads to fever and inflammation. TNF-alpha plays a role systemically by creating inflammation and can lead to cell death, apoptosis. C-reactive protein, most people are familiar with that one. It's a marker for inflammation, and it indicates ongoing inflammation. We used to think C-reactive protein was limited to just heart inflammation, and we know that's not true anymore. It can show inflammation anywhere in the body. And then we have neutrophils, which are white blood cells, and they help fight infection, but they can contribute actually to the tissue damage as well, especially if there's a lot of them being produced there. So endotoxins activate these cytokines, and they create a very large immune response, which then creates tissue damage and chronic inflammatory conditions. The long-term exposure to these endotoxins can contribute to respiratory issues, cardiovascular issues, and systemic health problems as well. Environments with mold are likely to have higher levels of these endotoxins. Water systems, like we talked about, water tanks, pipes, your HVAC system, they all can harbor bacteria and produce these endotoxins if not properly maintained or cleaned. And these endotoxins can make you sick just like the mycotoxins can. To prevent them, you want to do regular maintenance of cleaning your water tanks, your plumbing systems. This is crucial. Very few people flush out their pipes, their plumbing systems, and this is a good thing to do at least annually to make sure there's not that bacteria buildup. And then, obviously, like anything else, promptly address the water damage to keep the bacteria and the endotoxin level down. And I'll give you some tips in a little bit too about how we can do this on a regular basis. It sounds very overwhelming, but it can be pretty simple sometimes too. So here's some symptoms that we see commonly when you're exposed to mycotoxins. Recurrent nasal polyps is almost 99% to 100% a cause of being exposed to mold. Allergens, infection, visual problems, eye floaters, blurred vision, stress on the eyes where they feel strained after a while. Dark circles underneath the eyes, we call it allergic shiners. That's swelling under the eyes, dark circles, oftentimes mold issues. Any type of kidney issues, liver issues, itching in the ears, common with not just allergy exposure to mold, but also mold toxins. Sound sensitivity, ringing in the ears, sneezing, runny nose. These are all common symptoms that are explained by mycotoxins. That white coating on your tongue, or that thick kind of, people call it a hairy feeling. They can just kind of feel like something's on their tongue. That is commonly seen with mycotoxins. The white part we usually say is thrush or candida, mouth sores, chronic or frequent cough, wheezing, asthma. Those little cherry angiomas you get on your skin, those little red dots on the skin, those are oftentimes seen with mycotoxins, and it happens because the liver is not able to clear those toxins properly. Swelling, clotting issues, inflammation, increased appetite, bloating, fullness, SIBO, small intestinal bowel overgrowth, is aggravated by mycotoxin illness. Histamine intolerance, people who can't eat leftovers because they feel awful afterwards, that's a histamine reaction. That's usually a mast cell thing that's going on. If you're easily overwhelmed, the burning in the nerves, all can be related to mycotoxins. Some other symptoms that we're going to see are word finding, memory loss, dementia, chronic viral infections, Epstein-Barr, herpes family viruses, HHV6. These are all things that are coming because the immune system's being stressed. Now, as we age, we lose production from something called our thymus gland, and our thymus gland sits in the middle of our chest, and it stimulates our immune system. This is why the older we get, the more susceptible we are to pneumonia, because that thymus gland isn't working as well as it used to. And there's an easy way of getting it to stimulate, and you simply tap on the middle of your chest. So right between your breastbone at the top, you're going to do some tapping, and I'll turn my screen on again and I'll show you how to do some tapping when we get to the end here. And that can stimulate the thymus gland very easily. But this is why peptides like TA1 or thymosin alpha, thymosin beta are so important in infection and mycotoxins, because they stimulate that thymus production and boost that immune system without overstimulating it, so it doesn't disrupt the autoimmune component of what we're seeing happen. So supporting that thymus gland is not just an anti-aging tool, but it's essential for getting rid of infection. Our spleen is another crucial role for immune system. Unfortunately, some people have lost their spleen due to trauma or other infections, and doctors in the conventional world tell them that your spleen is not important. It is extremely important in producing things to help your immune system. So if you have a thymus gland or a spleen issue where it's not functioning properly, I love to use glandulars to help build this process up and make these organs function much better. All right, I hope you guys are holding on a little bit. I know it's getting long and I know this is heavy, but I hope this is super helpful for you guys. Let's get into mold testing. This is where things can get exciting and scary at the same time. So we have direct testing and we have indirect testing. And this applies to whether we're testing things inside of our bodies or inside of our environments. So direct mold testing involves collecting samples directly from the environment or the body to identify the quantity of a mold presence. You can do this by air sampling, so like a petri dish plate. You can put a little device out and collect air. You usually use things that collect spore traps. You can do surface sampling with this, where you can swab an area that you see. So if you see mold growing in your bathroom, you can take a Q-tip swab that area, send that out to the lab. You can also do what we call tape testing, where you take tape that looks like Scotch tape, literally touch it against the surface, send that out to the lab. And then we can also do something called bulk sampling, which is where we can cut pieces of material away, such as drywall or insulation. This is how you can test your filters in your furnace. You can test your furniture by clipping a piece off the back of the furniture and send that in. And then they can determine what type of mold growth is there. The advantages to this is it provides concrete evidence that mold is present. It will tell you what specific mold species are there, and it can target remediation efforts. It does have its limitations because you can't get behind hidden walls or take samples of the HVAC system unless you can see mold, somebody's cleaning the HVAC system, and you're actually swabbing it. Otherwise, it's hard for us to test those specific areas. Indirect mold testing tests mycotoxins, and it tests environment. So this is where ERMI comes into place. ERMI is a DNA-based analysis. It's a dust sample. You can test it by either a vacuum sample or a cloth test. Immunological testing can be done with cytokines to mold exposures. That's another indirect method. And then something we call VCS testing, visual acuity testing. This is assessing the neurological impact of the biotoxin exposure. This is prevalent in Dr. Schumacher's protocol. And you can actually get a free VCS test. I think I have the name of it in another slide. If not, I'll get it for you before we end here. And so this is going to detect the overall mold exposure and the health impact for you. And sometimes we can see hidden mold sources that might not be visible when we're doing these kinds of things. The advantages is you can see the health impact. The limitations are that it can't detect an exact location. Like when you do an ERMI test, they typically send one Swiffer type cloth and you're supposed to test multiple areas. But now you've contaminated multiple areas with that same cloth, and we don't necessarily know what area had what mold when we're doing that, unless you're doing a separate sample cloth for each area, and then it can become very expensive to do that. Direct testing is best when you can see visible mold growth. Indirect testing is ideal when you have symptoms, but there's no visible mold present. Okay, I'm going to show you a sample here. This is a company called My Myco Lab. This is a direct mold test. It's a blood test, and they test two samples, IgE and IgG. And we draw blood so we can see exactly what it's coming from. You can do tissue sample too, but there's no reason to do that. You can also use this test for air and surface swabs and dust testing as well. And what we're looking at here are two different things. So with the IgE, when we see that, we know that that is the mold that somebody's been exposed to within the previous 2 weeks of doing the test. When we look at IgG, this is what somebody's been exposed to over a 6-month period of time. Traditional docs are going to say, if you've got a lot of IgE present, you have allergies to mold and it's not a problem. That's not true, because that IgE response is going to show us the inflammation that these molds are causing inside the body. IgG will also show inflammation. So if I see this test, I'm very concerned. Even though their IgE doesn't look terrible, their IgG is horrible. And every single one of these molds, mycotoxins, are positive, and the mycophenolic acid is high. So I look at this and I say, okay, there's a live mold somewhere that this person's being exposed to. They've got gliotoxin, so I know that's in their pituitary. It's damaging their brain. They're exposed to ochratoxin A. I have to be worried about cancer in this person. They have cladosporium. Alternaria. Alternaria is kind of one of those that goes, it's an outdoor mold. It's not really horrible, but they have tons of aspergillus and stachybotrys, and this is going to tank their immune system, and it's going to completely set them up for cancer if we don't get rid of this soon. So we have to be aggressive when we see these kinds of things. Now, if I'm seeing somebody with labs like this, I know this is going to take me a minimum of 6 to 12 months to completely clean them out. It's not going to go away overnight. And I'm going to want to target that gliotoxin first to try to get rid of the rest of the mycotoxins. And I need to find the source of their mold, because if I don't, no matter what we do, this person's going to continue to suffer. Okay. All right, let's look at Dr. Schumacher's labs. So Dr. Schumacher's protocol was one of the very first mold protocols that was devised about, 15 years ago, maybe already. And he was the forefront doctor who brought mold to the forefront for people to start to realize that this causes a lot of chronic illness. These tests are devised to determine if somebody has CIRS, chronic inflammatory response syndrome, and to use these tests to see what our treatment is doing and is it decreasing that inflammation. So VCS test, that's the visual acuity test. You can do a free test from, it's called vcstest.com. And this will help determine if there's neurological dysfunction related to the biotoxin exposure. They've also recently changed some of their testing. So not only can we see if there's a biotoxin exposure, we can see if there's another toxic exposure, if you're herxing, you're getting that die-off reaction, or if you're not detoxing properly. So there's a couple of different methods now that we can see within this test that we couldn't see before. So it can be really helpful. The downside is if you're doing this test in the environment where there's mold, you're going to have an abnormal test, and we're not going to see exactly what's happening to you, but we're going to see how you're responding in your environment that either had mold in it or that you suspect has mold in it. He also determined something called HLA-DRA genetic testing. I used to do a lot of this. I don't do it quite so much anymore. I know if somebody's genetically sensitive to mold or other problems because they're the person that's sensitive to everything. I don't necessarily have to do genetic testing to prove that. I know that. I'd rather see people spend their money on a full genetic panel so I can see, how do you detox? What are you susceptible to? What vitamins do you need to stay on for the rest of your life to open your detox pathways, to open your genetic pathways or mutations that are there? Instead of just doing HLA-DR testing. We also look at biomarkers called C4A and C3A, and these help us determine how severe the inflammation is in your body. And you can use these to judge what you're doing for treatment, and elevated levels indicate ongoing inflammation. So even though somebody may feel really good and their mycotoxin levels look low, if their C4A and C3A are high, we know they still have a lot of inflammation in the body, and we need to go quiet that inflammation. TGF-beta, or transforming growth factor, is a biomarker that indicates how the immune system is functioning. Elevated levels are associated with chronic inflammation and tissue remodeling. We'll also see elevated levels if somebody is developing cancer. And so if those levels continue to stay high, despite the fact that the mycotoxins are gone, we need to test for cancer in those patients. MMP9 is involved in tissue remodeling and inflammation as well, and high levels of this indicates that we've crossed the blood-brain barrier with these molds. It's in the brain, it's in the tissues, and we're getting inflammation. You're going to predispose that person to dementia, Alzheimer's, ALS, MS, and we need to be aggressive in getting that down. MSH plays a role in regulating that inflammation and that immune response. So low levels indicate disruption in this system. Typically, when we see really low levels of MSH, we're going to see a lot of fatigue in these people. And until the MSH level comes up, their fatigue level is going to stay very low. Dr. Schumacher is also the one who identified Marcon's testing, and this is the nasal colonization of mold and staph in the nasal passages. And then he also developed VIP, looked at VIP hormone to reduce inflammation. In his protocol, this is the last treatment that's deployed. Once all the mold is gone, the inflammation is down, we introduce VIP, and that helps to reduce the inflammation in the brain, and in his theory can completely reverse sears. I've seen people get this too soon in their treatment and not do anything at all and actually re-trigger their inflammation. So it's a very comprehensive approach, and a lot of doctors will include his protocol, Neil Nathan's protocol, Dr. Jill Christa's protocol, and they kind of pick and choose and decide when they're going to do different testing depending on how the patient is presenting with their symptoms. Additional testing that we have is complete genetic testing, where we can look at over, oh my gosh, we can look at over, I think, almost 200 genes these days. It's literally changing every single day, and this can personalize somebody's treatment. B12 levels are very important for nerve function, and a lot of times the B12 level will go down in mold exposed people, and we need to elevate that level. We always like to look for a CBC. That's our complete blood count. It tells us if we're dealing with infection or anemia, and it helps us to determine what's happening with the body as a whole. And then we look at a complete metabolic panel. This is looking at liver function, kidney function, electrolyte balance. When we're concerned that mold is affecting the kidneys and the liver, we can monitor it with this test to see what's happening. We like to look at iron levels because iron overload can increase that inflammation. So if you have a high ferritin level or a high iron level, it's going to increase your inflammation. When there's high cholesterol and triglycerides, oftentimes you're going to see high iron levels, and you need to get that down to protect the heart. We like to look at hormones because these molds disrupt the hormonal system. So we like to look at things like estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, cortisol. If you've been exposed to Zen, you'll see very high levels of estrogen because your body's not clearing it properly. That's what we call estrogen dominance. And then we need to get that estrogen out of the body to reduce your risk of getting breast cancer. Vitamin D is crucial for building the immune system. You want a vitamin D level to be between 60 and 80, regardless of what your primary care doctor says. If it's normal and it's 30, it's not good. It needs to be between 60 and 80 to build that immune system and fight infection. It's also a hormone. We need it for cognitive function. So there's a lot of benefits. If you're supplementing with vitamin D, you need to be supplementing with vitamin D3, not D2. Prescription is D2. We want D3. And high levels of supplementation of D, like 5,000 units or more, need to be taken with vitamin K2. K2 helps that vitamin D get processed, get it into the bones, and function better. And then we already talked about C-reactive protein as well. Additional tests that we like to look at are glutathione. Glutathione levels, we can actually measure that. We can see how low the glutathione level is. So do you need to take more? Do you need to detox? Where are you at with that? We can look at general immunoglobulins, not just the ones from my myco lab. We can get them from the traditional lab. We look at IgE, IgG, IgM, and then we can also look at something called subclasses. And that gives us a deeper picture of what's going on with your immune system. How's that immune system functioning? What's happening there? We usually like to look at something called an ANA, anti-nuclear antibody, that tells us if these things have triggered an autoimmune disease. It's usually not specific to one particular immune system. It's a catch-all. But once we see that, then we dig deeper and figure out what part of the body is being attacked by the immune system. And then we have to go in and try to help stop that so that it doesn't get attacked. Most commonly, people are familiar with autoimmune thyroid disease. Hashimoto's is common. The thyroid is always affected by mycotoxins and toxins, and you can monitor those thyroid levels, those autoimmune markers, based on how you're being exposed to those mycotoxins. And then looking at those cytokines again. So looking at that IL-8, IL-1, TNF alpha, those are all cytokines. We can determine how inflamed the body is. And then oftentimes looking at an EKG, most of you have probably heard of this, where they put those little electrodes on your chest, takes less than 5 minutes, and they can see how your heart is firing, the electrical path of your heart. So when you have those heart palpitations and chest pain, we can rule out, is there truly something going on with the heart, or is it simply coming from these mycotoxins at this point? Okay, now we're going to get into some fun stuff. We're going to get into how do we get rid of this junk in our body? We need to eliminate these toxins. So the initial defense is for the body to inhale it and then breathe that out, but it can go through the membranes of the lungs. We call that cilia. It traps those mold spores so that it can't go to the rest of the body. And then we get macrophages and neutrophils to destroy those particles. Then what actually happens is we get that inflammatory response that starts, the cytokines come out, the IL-8, IL-1, TNF alpha releases to try to quiet that down. Next, we have to go through the liver to detox. And there's two pathways for the liver detox, phase 1 and phase 2. And in phase 1, this is where we're going to release those toxins, move them out, and eliminate them. It's water soluble. In phase 2 detox pathways, this is where we try to excrete them. This is where glutathione works and helps to eliminate through those liver function. And then kidney, always with mold, you've got to be moving the kidneys. Lots of water, lemon water, cucumber water, flushing those kidneys out, hydrating well, getting rid of that. And then gallbladder and liver together. So we call this bile excretion with the gallbladder. That bile gets sludgy and it gets thick when mold is present, and then it can't move through the kidneys well. So this is where bile salts come in handy. Ox bile comes in handy here. And that will move these toxins through the digestive tract and out through the stool. If you're constipated, you're not moving these toxins, you're reabsorbing them. So you want to be moving your bowels at least 2 to 3 times a day. For every meal you have a day, you should be moving your bowels. If you're not, you need to take something to help stimulate that. Something like magnesium citrate, turkey rhubarb. Cellcore makes a really nice product called Bowel Mover that can be helpful. Aloe vera is really helpful for moving the bowels. Those kinds of things are going to help you secrete that out quicker. We're almost done, guys. Only a few more slides here. So let's look at the environmental mold testing options that we have. We talked about a few of these, but we're going to go a little bit more in depth with these. So we have immunolytics. Immunolytics is a Petri dish test. You can collect mold spores from the air. You can do a swab test. This is the Petri dish that you can use to tap your furniture. You can tap your mattress. You can tap your carpet with it. We recommend you tap your clothes in your closet. You can set it upright and just let the air come into it. It has some really good benefits. It's cost effective. It's inexpensive. It's about $35 a plate to test. It may not capture all the mold spores in the environment, but it's pretty good. We believe that it doesn't detect Stachybotrys very well. We're actually in the process of testing that right now because we have a known Stachybotrys source and we're trying to see if they can pick it up. But it's a nice screening test for sure. Then we have our dust testing. So we use a company called We Test Dust. And you can do samples from your home with like a Swiffer cloth and you can wipe that on, or you can vacuum with a vacuum attachment that they'll send you. And this can identify hidden mold sources. It's very comprehensive with mold spores in the dust. And it requires very specific equipment, so that can be a downside to things, and it can be quite expensive. And then you have ERMI. ERMI is the most expensive out of all. It was designed as a research test, so some people argue whether or not it's suitable for testing mold in the environment. I think it is, but it's very complex, and you need to have a specialist actually read your results or you won't understand it. But it is very specific, and they can test mycotoxins, they can test molds, they can test all kinds of different things. It is very expensive though. So if you're questioning it and you're not quite sure and you don't want to spend a lot of money, start with immunolytics, and then we can always move on from there if we don't find what we're actually looking for in the environment. You can also use what's called a building biologist, and this is a interdisciplinary field that focuses on creating healthy indoor environments. A building biologist is trained to identify health hazards in the workplace and in your living environment. So they can test indoor air quality, chemical pollutants like formaldehyde, carbon dioxide, EMF levels, they can test mold. They can test all kinds of things, and they will give you very specific recommendations when they're testing of what you need to do to have a healthy environment. Oftentimes when there's mold, there's high levels of what we call VOCs or formaldehyde, and that formaldehyde can cause a lot of brain damage, and it can cause neurological conditions, ALS, MS, Parkinson's, those types of things. So you want to make sure your environment is clean that way. We also can look at indoor air quality. The building biologist is skilled to look at that. They have different devices they can bring in and look at EMFs. So your electromagnetic fields, those toxins that get released from our computer sources. The building biologist can test for those biochemicals, the particle matter. They can test for different gases. They can test different building materials, and they have access to all these different tests. And it's really not as expensive as you would think. I had someone come out to my house. She spent 4 hours, tested everything in my house. It was $800 for her to test. By the time you start doing ERMI and do some of these other tests that are $1,200, $1,500 a piece just for mold testing, you can have a more extensive test of your environment for a lot less money. Okay. Let's see. So they can do visual assessments. They do moisture readers. They can look under the microscope at different things. They can drill holes into different places in your home to find mold inside the walls. They'll typically also bring a thermography machine. So just like we use thermography to see inside of our body, they can see inside of our walls, and they can see on your furniture if there's mold lighting up there. And that's a really nice way to not disturb the environment of your furniture if you need somebody to test and see if you have mold present on any of those things as well. We use Martine Davis. She runs a company called Air Inspector out of Wisconsin. She's amazing, brilliant gal, really sweet, and that's who we recommend for looking at mold remediation. They can also look at bacterial overgrowth, not just mold, so they can get like your whole place can be changed very quickly for a very reasonable price. Okay, so tips for leaving a water damaged building. This is always the controversy. What do you take? What do you leave? Do you live in a tent outside your house? How do you do this? So first and foremost, when you see water damage, take pictures of it, especially if you're going to have to turn that into your insurance for remediation, because most insurance policies for buildings have coverage for mold remediation. So you definitely want to take pictures. You want to report it, even though you may not know if there's mold there or not. Document this damage. And then when you're in the moldy environment, when you come out of it, shower, change your clothes, wash yourself thoroughly, cleanse your sinus cavities out. Some people will use actual protective equipment like N95 masks. Traditional masks that we have really are not beneficial at all for this kind of thing. rinse your nose out, do the best you can there, use some iodine, use colloidal silver, whatever you have on hand to flush that nose out and get rid of those mold spores as quickly as you can. When you leave an environment and you don't feel better after you've left the water damage building or after you've remediated and you still feel sick, it's typically because the biotoxins are still either in your body or in your environment. You can have systemic chronic inflammatory response syndrome. You can have secondary infections to mold. You can have genetic mutations secondary to the mold exposure. You can have that inflammatory response syndrome, and or you could have a re-exposure to mold and a re-trigger. So we usually recommend, if you've remediated your house and everything looks good and you're still feeling bad, we need to look at inflammatory markers to see, has everything truly left your body? And if it has and there's no inflammation, then we need to look at your genetics and see what's going on there. Okay, air purifiers. What are the best air purifiers to use? This question we get asked quite often. IntelliPure by Healthway is a really great air purifier. My friend Dr. Jill Krista, this is at the top of her list, and it's primarily due to the advanced filtration system that they have. It creates zones or biostasis, which prevents mold from growing inside the filter itself. Even in a high humidity area, you won't grow mold spores in there. It traps the mold and ensures that it doesn't proliferate or regrow inside the unit. It does have a higher cost to get into it, but it does have long-term benefits of preventing mold growth and maintaining clear airways. You have the IQ Air. I really like the IQ Air as well. I have a bunch of those. It's a high performance HEPA filter, and it captures those fine particles, including those mold spores. And they're robust and designed for long-term use, making them really great investments. Now, these are excellent filtration systems. They can be a little bit more expensive than your average filters or your average products. But again, if you're dealing with mold, you really want one that's doing what it's supposed to be doing, because by the time you buy multiple HEPA filters and they don't work, you've spent just as much money as you could spend on one of these. And then there's the Enviro Cleanse. And this is a combination of a HEPA filter and an earth mineral technology to remove particles and chemicals from the air. And it purifies in a safe, non-toxic way and provides comprehensive solution for improving air quality in mold affected homes. So this is really good. Filters need to be changed periodically to ensure optimal performance, which can add to the maintenance costs a little bit, but these are really great products. Next is fogging. So using a fogger from a company called Microbalance, you can use their EC3 mold solution concentrate, or you can use something called Decon 30. Both are natural substances that can be used to cleanse the environment. And you're basically going to take a couple of capfuls of this solution or the Decon 30. You're going to put it into the white compartment of this and add water up to the line where it is. You're going to turn it on and you're going to blast it. If you guys remember seeing what is the movie? Ghostbusters, and they have these bomb type things. That's kind of what it's like. It reminds me of that. But it blows out this mist and you can clean large areas really fast. I clean my office with this I have a 4,200 square foot office. I can clean in under 5 minutes. I clean my house with it, and it just kills the endotoxins, it kills the mycotoxins, it kills mold, and it keeps that level down. So if you're mold sensitive, this is a great thing to have. It's not inexpensive. It's about 500 bucks. But it lasts a long time and it does a great job. And I understand they just came out with a portable one. So if you travel a lot and you're in environments like hotels that you're always concerned about, they have a small travel model that you can use as well. So this is a really great thing because it cleans all the different areas, and it's not damaging to any of your wood or your furniture. It's not damaging to the animals in your house or kids because it's a natural solution that's in there. Okay. Next is essential oils. Most of us love essential oils, but mold toxic people can be sensitive to the smell, and that's from the mast cell aspect of things. On Guard and Thieves are both the same product. On Guard is made from doTERRA. Thieves is made from Young Living. Both of them are equally effective products. And this formulation was actually studied in commercial buildings that were infected with mold, and compared to the industrial chemical compound, compared to this formulation killed mold better than their commercial product that was there. So it's a blend of clove, lemon, cinnamon, eucalyptus, and rosemary. It's antimicrobial, so it'll kill the endotoxins. It's antifungal and it's antiviral. You can mix a couple of drops of this into a bottle with vinegar. You can spray it on visible mold to kill it. You can put it in your washing machine to clean your washing machine out. And you can also put it in what's called a dry diffuser. So a dry diffuser has a little bottle on it that you would fill with this essential oil. It doesn't use water because you don't ever want to use water when there's mold stuff. And you turn it on and you just let it diffuse into the air, and it will kill mold everywhere. Now, if you're really sensitive to mold, you could have a die-off reaction from running this if you're in the environment, because it's going to also kill off mold inside your body because you're breathing it in. So you just have to be a little cautious with that if you're sensitive. Microbalance EC3 products are designed for mold remediation. They're botanical extracts along with these essential oils, and they make a variety of products. They make a candle that you can burn inside the house. They make a product to clean your washing machine, your dishwasher. They make the big bottle that you can put inside the fogger. They make all kinds of different products that you can use for different reasons. And all of these are safe and they're effective, and they're non-toxic. All right, so let's look at the food don'ts. So we want to avoid high fructose corn syrup, sugary processed foods, fruit juices that are high in fructose because they don't have the fiber that helps moderate the sugar levels. And those high fructose and sucrose levels can feed mold. You want to avoid dry fruit. You can do natural fruits. Just be careful. Do the fruits that are lower on the glycemic index. So like your berries, your citrus fruits, green apples versus red apples. Avoid your melons and your bananas because they're very high in sugar and they can feed yeast over time and feed mold over time. You also want to be very cautious with artificial sweeteners because they disrupt the gut flora and they can lead to metabolic issues and make it more difficult for you to recover from the mycotoxin exposure. So things like aspartame, sucralose, saccharin, you want to avoid those. Use your natural sweeteners instead. What you do want to do is spring water, green tea, sea salt. You can use honey as your natural sweetener. You can use maple syrup, just limit it so you're not doing too much of it. You want to do whole foods, whole fruits in moderation with the fiber. You can use molasses as a natural sweetener as well. You can also use applesauce as a natural sweetener, and incorporate your anti-inflammatory foods that help to reduce the inflammation. So things like turmeric, ginger, fatty fish like salmon, leafy greens, spinach, and kale. They'll cleanse the liver and they help to increase bile so that these toxins can get out faster. And then make sure you're taking in plenty of protein and fats because that's going to build that mitochondria, repair that cell damage, give you more energy. Limit your carbohydrates and limit your whole grains a little bit because those tend to be that moldy source as well. Now, probiotics can be controversial when we talk about mold. Some people say yes, some people say no, but probiotics actually disrupt the mycotoxins, and mycotoxins disrupt the gut function. So the probiotic, when we take it in an oral fashion, is going to crowd out those mycotoxins, decrease the inflammation in the gut lining, and help with getting over the mold issues. But you do have to be careful because some of the probiotics can actually make the SIBO worse that we get from mold, that bloating, that full feeling, and then we need to cut back on that probiotic. Saccharomyces boulardii is a really great probiotic. It's going to crowd out that mold in the gut. Lactobacillus and bifidobacter are really good probiotics as well. And you can find a combination, a probiotic of these. Orthomolecular makes a nice one called Ortho 100. Megaspore is a really nice one. Clara Labs makes a really clean Saccharomyces boulardii, or Sac B as we call it. And these things can really be helpful to just reduce that inflammation in the gut. And they all have anti-inflammatory properties as well. Next, we're going to talk about binders. Binders are essential when we're talking about mold, because as we're releasing these toxins, we need to bind them and get them out of the body. Binders can make you constipated, so you have to make sure you're moving your bowels. If you get constipated from binders, you're going to use things like magnesium citrate and aloe vera to help move the bowels a little bit more. Binders remove mycotoxins from the body. They are safe to use during pregnancy. And examples of those are activated charcoal, bentonite clay, cholestyramine. These binders actually trap the mycotoxins in the gut and prevent them from reabsorbing in the body. And they're eliminated through the stool then. They overall reduce that toxic load. And sometimes they can cause a little gut disruption for you. We can also use homeopathics. Homeopathics are just diluted substances that stimulate the body's natural process. So for people who are really sensitive to that mast cell, this is where this can be really helpful. So we use remedies like Nux vomica, arsenicum, and silica in the homeopathic world to help support detox and improve that vitality. They're very gentle, they're non-invasive, and almost everybody can tolerate them. The only difference is if a homeopathic is in a glycerin-based or an alcohol-based, you want to try to find one that's more in the glycerin versus the alcohol. And then we have herbs like milk thistle, turmeric, garlic, oregano oil. These all help with liver function, reduce inflammation, and they all have anti-inflammatory properties. So they're going to help eliminate those mycotoxins. We can use medications like amphotericin B and itraconazole. We like to do what's called limbic retraining, where this focuses on the brain to reduce the inflammation. So sometimes you'll see people talk about dynamic neural retraining systems, DNRS. This is really helpful. You can use a program called Resimax is really good. And there's some different brain retraining programs that you can do online. You can find them from YouTube. You can find all kinds of brain retraining programs. There's also a program called Brain Tap that you can do. They have a very specific headset, but you don't need to purchase their headset. You can use your own headset and just pay like a $15 monthly fee to get their programs. They'll all do limbic retraining for you and vagus nerve retraining, which is really important when we're going through this. Kybella injections, this is kind of controversial, but Kybella was used for cosmetic purposes, anti-aging, but now we're finding that it reduces the biofilms and protects the body against the mycotoxins. And it does that by dissolving the fat cells and disrupting those biofilms in the fat to release the mycotoxins. And so we use this a lot for weight loss. But this is a problem when people have too many mycotoxins, they gain too much weight, and these molds store in the body fat. So if we can release them from the body fat, you can reduce those mycotoxins a lot quicker. And then we have something called on-demand therapy, which is a biofeedback pulsed electronic magnetic field, PEMF. And this promotes healing. And it's non-invasive. You can do it along with other treatments. We look at heart rate variability as we're delivering different programs. So people who are really sensitive and can't tolerate herbs or anything can use on-demand or like a Rife machine. It's very similar to a Rife machine to eliminate these mycotoxins. The difference between this and Rife is we can target very specifically the frequencies that are bothering you, where sometimes with the Rife, they're very generalized, where on-demand we can get very specific with that. So some of the nutrients that we need is D3. We talked about that a little bit. We need DHA and EPA. This is your fish oil. You need a lot of DHA for brain, liver, and kidney, and you need EPA to dilute those mold toxins. And the DHEA gets the mold out of the brain, out of the kidneys, and out of the liver. It's also very anti-inflammatory, so it reduces that inflammation. EPA is another form of omega-3s, and it also helps to reduce inflammation, supports the immune system, and it works synergistically with DHEA. Phospholine is so important for brain protection. So phospholine is an amino acid. It decreases the oxidative damage and helps rebuild your cells, that mitochondria that's damaged. It also helps your body make plasmalogens. If you're interested in learning, you know somebody who's had Parkinson's, ALS, Alzheimer's disease, Dr. Goodenow is an amazing researcher who has studied plasmalogens and is actually reversing Alzheimer's disease, ALS, and Parkinson's by the plasmalogen therapy. And phospholine helps to make those plasmalogens. So it's very important. It also helps to support the liver and helps to detox mycotoxins from the liver. We can also use lycopene. Lycopene reduces oxidative damage caused by those mycotoxins. It protects the cells from the radical damage and prevents further damage. It also is effective in reducing and supporting overall health. I love a product called Kidney Chi. It's from Dr. Chi. It's a Chinese herbal product. He tests it for mold and heavy metals. I've actually used this and reversed stage 2 and stage 3 liver disease with this product. It's amazing. And since we need to really protect the kidneys, or sorry, not stage 3 liver, stage 3 kidney. Did I say that right? I'm getting lost in myself. But it is supportive of the kidneys. And since we know kidney damage is so prevalent with mycotoxin illness, Kidney Chi is really important for detoxifying those mycotoxins in there. And it helps to neutralize free radical damage as well. And then we have vitamin E, which is very protective. With vitamin E, you want to make sure you're getting something called mixed tocopherols. You don't want a single source tocopherol, you want mixed. Single source tocopherols can cause more inflammation. So if you use a mixed tocopherols, and you'll know it, it'll say it on the back of the bottle, that's good. It's very protective of the skin, liver, and lung. And it helps to also reduce inflammation and repair the damaged tissues. Glutathione, again, very important. It helps to regulate sleep. That's when we detox most, is at night. Our liver dumps most of its toxins there. So you want glutathione, especially at night. You can also take something called NAC. NAC, or N-acetylcysteine, is the precursor to glutathione. So it'll help your body make glutathione. We want to have CoQ10 in there. That helps to support the mitochondria. It helps with energy, protects the heart, helps to boost glutathione. Melatonin is actually a hormone, so it helps to regulate sleep, stimulates the production of glutathione as well, is a great antioxidant, is a great detoxifier. We can actually measure melatonin by blood to see if somebody's deficient in it and if they need it or if they're taking enough of it. So that can be extremely helpful as well. Selenium is important. It's a trace mineral. It protects the thyroid. It helps to make glutathione, helps to reduce hydrogen peroxide and lipid peroxidase in the body, and protects against cellular damage as well. Some of the herbs that we use, botanicals or herbs, milk thistle. Milk thistle is amazing for liver regeneration. If somebody has cirrhosis of the liver or has liver damage, milk thistle can actually help regenerate healthy liver cells again. So it's super important in liver function, crucial in detoxification. It's also known as silymarin, that's its other name. And it can be taken morning or night. Oftentimes we'll dose it at bedtime, just again, because that liver detox pathway happens mostly at night, and it just makes it better. People who have problems sleeping and they have that broken sleep between 2 and 3, it's usually their liver dumping the toxins and they're not clearing it properly or efficiently. And if they take milk thistle at bedtime, it helps them sleep, get into that deeper REM sleep. Green tea is amazing. It has what we call ECGC in it, which is highly effective against mold mycotoxins. It neutralizes the body. It's anti-inflammatory. It does give you energy. It has a little caffeine in it. So if you're sensitive to caffeine, be careful with it. Don't drink it too late at night because it can keep you up. And then, of course, turmeric. Turmeric's very anti-inflammatory. But turmeric also contains something called curcumin, which has what we call epigenetic properties. So it can modulate gene expression and it can enhance your detox pathways. It can protect your body from that DNA, RNA damage, that genetic damage. Artichoke is great. It's one of my favorite products. It helps to thin the bile, helps to reduce that inflammation in the liver, helps the liver clear toxins better. It's also a digestive aid, so it helps in the process of eliminating toxins, can help calm the stomach as well. Resveratrol is found in grapes, berries. It's what we find in wine that people say is so healthy for us. You have to make sure if you're using resveratrol, though, that the company you're getting it from is testing it for mold. And you can always call the company and ask them to show you their tests because it's coming from grapes. Grapes are sprayed with a lot of toxins. So you want to be very cautious, make sure that they're doing organic grapes, they're not spraying them. And then knotweed is really great. It's also a resveratrol product. It helps with cognitive function, helps with dementia, helps to reduce inflammation. And then aloe is amazing for GI. It's very calming. It has very healing properties. Just like we put aloe on our skin with a burn, we can do the same thing internally if people have acid reflux or stomach upset or constipation. So it also helps to eliminate toxins. It is a natural binder. So if people get constipated from charcoal or clay, they can use aloe as their binder and not have problems with constipation or gut bloating and upset stomach, things like that. Then we have systemic antifungals. So these are herbs that are antifungals. So their neem is amazing. You can actually spray neem on your plants to keep the fungal levels down. You can take neem orally. It's a very strong antifungal. It eliminates fungal infections and including mycotoxins. It supports liver function. It helps the body detoxify and eliminate toxins. It is also very immune boosting. So if you have somebody with a decreased immune system, it can be helpful. It's a nice product because it can do multiple things at one time. Holy basil is really nice. It's considered an adaptogen and helps the body cope with stress. And stress can be increased from the mycotoxins because the body's going through a physical process of eliminating things. It's also anti-inflammatory. It reduces inflammation caused by the mycotoxins, and it supports the liver as well. We have olive leaf, which is a great antimicrobial, antifungal, antibacterial, antiviral. The thing with olive leaf is you have to rotate it. You don't want to take olive leaf or oregano for more than 8 weeks at a time. The body gets too used to it. It can cause problems, so make sure you're rotating those. It also boosts the immune system, and it can help get rid of mycotoxins. Podoarco is great. It's antifungal, antibacterial. It can be made as a tea. So if you're tired of taking capsules, you can get Podoarco tea and you can drink the tea. It also strengthens the immune system and helps you eliminate those toxins. And then we have thyme. Thyme can be used as a cooking agent. It can be used as a capsule. It can be used as an essential oil. It has very strong antifungal properties, gets rid of the mycotoxins. It can help with respiratory issues, compromised immune systems, and of course, it detoxifies the liver as well. And then garlic is just a nice overall, it's very antibacterial, antifungal, it boosts the immune system. You can eat garlic, you can take it as a capsule, you can do it as an essential oil. Any of those things are great. It will definitely kill fungus very quickly. Tip 2, if you have toenail fungus, you can use On Guard or doTERRA directly on the toenail itself. And it usually takes about 12 weeks of applying it topically to the nail to go away, but it works really, really nicely. We have medications that we can use. They are very strong and very powerful. Itraconazole is the most common antifungal that we use for mycotoxins. It disrupts the cell membrane of the fungus itself and causes the fungus to die. So people can get that die-off or Herxheimer reaction from this, but it will work very beautifully. It is hard on the liver, so you have to be cautious with that. We have to watch liver function, but it works really well. We also have diflucan or fluconazole. Most of the fungal infections are getting really resistant to diflucan because we use it so much for vaginal fungal infections. but still can be used really well absorbed orally, penetrates the body tissues, can cause that die-off reaction though. People either love fluconazole or hate it. They either feel like somebody turned the lights on, their brain is clear, they're feeling great, they have energy, or they feel absolutely miserable. They don't like it because we're moving all this fungus and they're not getting it out of their body quick enough. Voriconazole is very similar to fluconazole. It disrupts the fungal membrane. Very effective if people have aspergillus. Very expensive, very hard to get, and is typically only used if people have a life-threatening fungal infection or they have aspergillus in their lungs. Nystatin's been around forever. It is also a nice antifungal. It blocks the fungal overgrowth in the gut. So it kind of works like Pac-Man, runs around, eats up all the gut fungus in there, and can cause fungal death in the gut. It's also used for thrush, so candida or fungus in the mouth. It's localized, so it can help reduce those cravings that people get when there's the fungal overgrowth and they're craving sugars. This is really helpful for that. Capsifungin is a newer antifungal. It is very expensive, like very, very expensive. Very good for candida, very good for aspergillus, and typically is given only in the IV form. And then we have amphotericin B, which helps with the cell membrane and the cell wall. Amphotericin B is great because it can be given orally. It can be given in a nasal spray. It can be given in a swish and spit. It's used for what they call life-threatening infections. We use it a lot in the nasal passages for colonization, and most people tolerate it very, very well. When we have colonization, we're going to use nasal spray antifungals. This is where we use colloidal silver in a nasal spray. The most common forms are Argentin is a company, and ASP is another company that you can use. They're very clean products of colloidal silver. You can take them orally, but again, it's something you don't want to use for more than 8 weeks at a time to take a break from it, whether you use it orally or in a nasal spray. We can also use essential oils in a nasal spray. They are very spicy, I will tell you, but they work very, very well, and they're very inexpensive. A bottle of essential oil nasal spray that we use runs about $20 versus something like bag spray is going to cost you about $150 to $200 a month from the compounding pharmacy. Colloidal silver is very inexpensive. You can also use xylitol nasal spray. Xylitol is a natural sugar alcohol. It prevents the pathogens and the mold spores from adhering to the inside of the nasal passage. It's also considered a biofilm buster, so it breaks open the biofilm so we can kill the fungus better. So oftentimes we'll add xylitol to another mixture to keep that in the nasal passages longer. And then we have bag spray. So when there is the Marcons, the staph-resistant bacteria that's there, we'll use Bactroban, EDTA, which is a chelating agent. It's also a biofilm buster, gentamicin, and oftentimes xylitol to target that infection to get rid of that Marcons infection. And sometimes you have to use that for a really long time before it is resolved. So thank you for sticking with me. It's been a long evening, I know, for all of you guys. I appreciate you all hanging in there. I want to encourage you guys that, people are sick for a long time, and you can get very discouraged from mold, and it doesn't have to be that way. There are new protocols, new products coming out all the time that we can work with. We're identifying different areas that we didn't even know about 5 years ago how to treat. And by implementing those things, we can make people healthier faster and make them feel so much better. So hang in there. Don't worry about it. Just keep trying. Don't give up. So with that, I'm going to see if anybody has any questions. I'll go ahead and look through here. If somebody wants to be unmuted and you want to ask a question, just raise your hand. I'll unmute you and you can ask questions all you want tonight. I don't mind that. So some of the questions are, how do you kill mold for very sensitive people? That is a challenge. You have to address the histamine. You have to use different products that are not as strong, and you have to go very, very slow. Mold and Lyme typically go together. Deb has a great question here. Where there's mold, there's Lyme. Where there's Lyme, there's mold. And you have to treat both of them because they both affect the immune system. They both affect the nervous system. And so if you're only treating one and you have both present, you're not going to get very far with either one of them. Hi, Bev. Thanks for showing up from Hubertus. I love that. You're welcome for recording. Oh my gosh, tornado warnings in Minnesota. I hope you guys are safe. Oh gosh. Does Candida make gliotoxin? It can. And Candida can make other toxins as well. Citrinin also is made from Candida. So if you have citrinin present, there's usually Candida there. If you have Candida, we're going to treat it just like any other mycotoxin. It's not special. It's just there. Does a ceiling fan in the bathroom with a water leak spot from the outside source create a mold problem? If you have a water spot on the ceiling, the likelihood of you having mold is very high because that means water came in, it's damaged that. If you have drywall on the ceiling, that mold is going to continue to grow in the drywall. The ceiling fan in the bathroom is going to have a lot of moisture on it. It tends to collect a lot of dust unless you're dusting it like every week. And that dust is going to attract the mold spores, and then that's going to create more mold. And then when you turn the fan on, it's going to spread those mold spores all around. So you want to make sure you're cleaning your ceiling fan really well and make sure you've got a great humidifier in there as well. Great question. Excellent. How do you find a good vent cleaning company in Naperville? Well, it's very hard. You have to talk to them. You have to ask them what they know about mold, what they do for mold, how do they detect mold in your vents, will they test it, and what kind of things do they use for cleaning it? I live in a very rural area where we don't have a lot of resources, and I brought somebody in and asked a few questions, and I was shocked. The young guy was extremely knowledgeable about mold in the ventilation system. He took extra precautions. He tested my vents for me. And luckily I didn't have anything there, but he was super knowledgeable. So some are more knowledgeable than others. I will say this too. If somebody says to you, I am a sick building syndrome expert, ask them one simple question. What do you do for Stachybotrys? And if they say, what's Stachybotrys? They are not a sick building syndrome specialist because they would know what those molds are. And so that's how you find out if people really know stuff. You drop some of these mold names and find out what they know about them. If they're truly knowledgeable, they'll know exactly what you're talking about and they'll start spewing at the mouth about it. If they don't know, just say thank you and move on to the next person. Is there a certification that you can look for both for dust mites and mold? Linda, I'm not sure what you mean about certification for them. You can test dust mites and you can test mold in the environment. You can also allergy test for dust mites and you can allergy test for mold. I'm not sure if that's what you mean. If you're still on, raise your hand and I'll come find you and I can ask that a little bit more. We can find out exactly what you mean about that. Where do you send mold plates? I recommend we use immunolytics. And if you want to know how to do that, you can call the office and the girls can send you all the instructions and the link and they'll tell you exactly, we have it all documented exactly how to collect your tests. Normally what I recommend is you test 5 areas in your house. Always bathroom, always kitchen, always basement, always bedroom, and then one other place in your house where you spend a considerable amount of time. You can test your mattress, and older mattresses you want to test because they can develop mold. If you have any kind of foam topper on the mattress or an added foam topper on the mattress, you definitely want to test your mattress because those foam toppers don't allow things to breathe. So when you're sleeping on there and you're sweating, they don't breathe and mold grows very easily in there. And you could be sitting in your bed for 8 hours and just having that mold, you're breathing it all night long. And that could be your source, even if the rest of your house is not testing positive. So it's really important to look at that. Are certain indoor plants less of a problem than others? Not really. It's not the plants, it's the soil. That's the problem. The soil is what produces the mold. So if you start to see white things on your soil, you need to change your soil out right away. What is the best way to clean tile and grout? Absolutely never ever bleach. Never ever bleach on anything that is mold. You will create so many mycotoxins and breed so many mycotoxins, it will make things worse. So you're better off using things like vinegar or the essential oil spray, and baking soda and water. That is the best way to clean anything that looks like it has mold present on it. Great question. Can NAC and black seed oil clean up your lungs if you're exposed to mold? It depends. NAC is a great detoxifier and it's going to create glutathione. And so it will help you detoxify. If your lungs are damaged from being exposed to mold, we can't necessarily fix the damage. If they're just inflamed from the mold, yes, then different things can be very helpful. NAC, black seed oil, glutathione, ozone. You don't want to breathe ozone. Don't get an ozone generator and put it in your house and breathe it while you're there. No. IV ozone, yes, that's different. But yes, you can clean up like chronic cough, asthma, tough things like that. You can actually inhale glutathione, which is amazing for the lungs and really helps with asthma. It's disgusting to do because glutathione, if you've ever smelled it, it smells like rotten eggs. It tastes like rotten eggs. So when you're inhaling it like a breathing treatment, you're going to taste that rotten egg taste. It's pretty nasty, but it works absolutely amazing. And glutathione is very inexpensive. Can nasal mold be given to others like a virus? No, it's contained to your nasal passages, so you can't spread it to somebody else. Is the nasal swab covered by insurance? Medicare? No, it never is. It costs about, I think it's $150-ish for the Marcons part of it. I don't know if they charge extra for the fungal part. You can call and ask Amanda or Kayla, and they can tell you what the prices are. The nasal swab has to be ordered by a practitioner. We use a company called Micro Diagnostic Laboratories, I believe is who we use. And you can either swab your nasal passage yourself or you can have somebody else do it. You have to get high enough up though in the nasal passages, like a COVID swab. And that can be really helpful then of identifying whether or not you have colonization in the nose. Can soaking rice quinoa in water help you get rid of the mold before cooking? Not really. Once it's there, it's there. As we know, heat doesn't get rid of it. Cooking doesn't always get rid of it. So it can help, but it's not going to completely get rid of all of the mold. My chiropractor gave me a homeopathic medicine for mycotoxins. Will that work? It can, depending on what the homeopathic is and what it's targeting and what kind of mycotoxins you have. It can help with those mycotoxins, but make sure you're using a binder. Make sure you're using things to detoxify as well. It's really important for that. Is there a name of the medication? I'm not sure which medication you mean, Mo. So if you're on here, you can either raise your hand or you can ask me in the chat and I'll look at that too. How do we prevent these molds from damaging your bodies, especially protecting your mitochondria? Great question, Debbie. The way that we prevent them is avoidance, for always and first avoidance. Secondarily, mitochondrial cocktail. A mitochondrial cocktail is your B vitamins, it's NAC, CoQ10, phosphatidylcholine, glutathione, and more recently we've added plasmalogens. Plasmalogens are not cheap, but if there's any neurological issues going on, brain fog, focus, concentration, memory, numbness, tingling, tremors, we add plasmalogens in there because plasmalogens will increase the brain volume and the brain will shrink with these toxins. As we age, it's also going to shrink. So it can actually increase your brain volume, prevent dementia, prevent Alzheimer's disease, prevent Parkinson's, and it can actually reverse it. Dr. Gooden now has a 100% halt rate on ALS using plasmalogens in this and mitochondrial protocol, which is amazing because nothing works for ALS. So that's your protocol that you want to use for mitochondria. Great question. Sub pump wells. Sub pump wells are problems, especially if there's water in them all the time. It's hard to suck the water out. You might want to talk to somebody about how do you do that. If you can't, what I would do is I would be putting thieves and or on guard in that sub pump to kill the mold from growing because it's standing water. So anytime there's standing water, just throw, a couple of drops of thieves oil or on guard down there, and that will significantly help. Dr. Dennis is located in Atlanta. He's amazing. He's my doctor. I love him. Does he offer the nasal swab? He might. I don't think he believes in it a ton because he thinks everybody has Marcons. He does take insurance though. So if you do need to see him, he does bill insurance, and I believe he takes Medicare, but you can check with his girls too. His name is Donald Dennis. He's incredible. I just absolutely love him to death. He saved my life. How do you flush out your pipes? So you basically, open the drain, run all the water, flush it through. If you have the ability to pump the pipes out and pump the water out of the house, like kind of drain your whole water system, you do that, then you shut it all off and you let the water come back up again. What would antibiotics do to mycotoxins? It depends. So antibiotics can feed fungus. So you do have to be cautious with that. And depending on where the fungus is in the body, if you're not doing antifungal herbs or medications, they can make fungus grow more, especially candida, especially in the gut. Systemic antibiotics, not so much, but oral antibiotics are worse for it. Sometimes we have to use antibiotics. We don't have a choice. And then we just have to be more cautious with the fungus and be more aggressive with treating the fungus as well. There is a correlation between Lyme and mycotoxins. Yes, where there's one, there's the other. It's a known factor. Part of it just happens because the immune system is down, and then you get exposed to the mycotoxins and your body can't fight the mycotoxins. Lori, great question. VCS problems will resolve if the mold is treated. They absolutely will. And you can use VCS testing to see if you've been exposed. So if you've been clean and you've been feeling good and you think you've gone into an environment that has mold, you can actually do the VCS test right after you've been in that environment or within a couple of days. And you can see if the VCS test is abnormal, then you know you've been exposed to a moldy environment. It's a nice, really inexpensive way to kind of determine, where you're going and what you're doing if you're being exposed or not. Oxygen concentrator, great question, Lynn. I didn't put that in here. I love oxygen concentrators. So an oxygen concentrator is different than an oxygen machine. It takes regular air to create oxygen. When you've had mold toxicity, in order to clear the gliotoxins from the brain and to repair the brain, you need high levels of oxygen pushed through the brain. So you use an oxygen concentrator, and one that can go up very high, like 8 to 10 liters. So it's not your traditional portable one. It's a stand-up unit that is going to be there. And you want to gradually work up on your oxygen concentration time. So you start with 15 minutes, get up to 2 hours a day. You can separate that time, but that will push the oxygen across the blood-brain barrier, start to heal the brain, and get those mycotoxins out of the brain. So you have better focus and concentration and energy. Sometimes that can be covered by insurance, not always. The device that, there's only a few devices, they're expensive though. They're like $1,200 to $1,500. If you have an HSA or an FSA or some other kind of flex spending, they can cover those devices for you. What ways can we open our detox pathways? Great question. NAC, glutathione, two biggest things, resveratrol, those are how you open your detox pathways. And then you use things like milk thistle or saline, which is the same thing, to flush out those toxins. VCS tests are not free. You're allowed one free VCS test. After that, they do charge $15 per test, but you can also pay for an unlimited test. I don't remember how much it is for the unlimited test, but you can pay a specific fee and get unlimited testing. How can an EKG tell if your irregular heartbeats are caused by mold or if it's just normal for you? The EKG is going to show electrical current of the heart, and we're going to be able, if there's heart issues going on, we're going to be able to see an abnormal EKG, and then you buy a ticket to see the cardiologist. If the EKG is normal, then those heart palpitations aren't necessarily caused by the heart malfunctioning. Then we know it's caused by other toxins or hormonal disruptions or things like that. Is there a difference between green mold and black mold? They're different molds, but they both can create mycotoxins. So they can both essentially help the same way. Certain essential oils helpful. Yes, On Guard, doTERRA, that lemon, oregano, thyme, clove, those are great essential oils. Young Living and doTERRA, you can consume those oils orally. Any other company do not do oils orally because they're not tested well. And then you can also put them in that dry diffuser as well. Building biologist, yes. I recommend Martine Davis. If you're in Wisconsin or you're in Tennessee, she is the person to see. If you're in a different state, you could always reach out to her and ask her who she knows in your state, because it's a small community. They all know each other, and she can give you a recommendation in your area as well. Will there be a list of recommended vendors at the end? I don't have a list of recommended vendors. And I'm not sure what you mean by vendors, like vendors by supplements or vendors by company. But if you want to know the vendors of supplements we use, you can call and talk to the girls here and they can give you that as well. And then Erin Spector, that's Martine Davis. Iodine ratio and saline solution. Yes. So it's 8 to 10 drops of iodine into it's about a 12-ounce bottle of saline spray. And you just take the top off. I go to the dollar store. Go to the dollar store, get your spray bottle, put your 8 to 10 drops in there. You can buy Lugol's, you can buy inexpensive iodine from the dollar store. It's the same type of thing. And then just carry that with you, mix it up, shake it before you use it every time. Spray, spray, done. Very inexpensive, very easy to do. Lori, does the fogger replace small particle cleaning? Yes, it can. So the fogger can kill those small particles. It can save you a ton of time with cleaning. So you're not having to wipe down every wall. You just spray everywhere and fog and you're done. You can buy the fogger on microbalance.com. That everything on there was designed by Dr. Dennis. So very high quality products, very well driven there. Where do you buy the diffuser? I buy my dry diffusers on Amazon. And if you just type in dry diffuser, you'll find one. It'll have a little vial. Do I have one here? I do. So this is what they look like. They look like this. They've got the little vial here. This is where you put your essential oil, and this just turns off and you fill it. And then this is the dry part, and then you just turn it on, plug it in, and then you can set the dial for however high you want the oil to come out. Does this have a name on it? I don't know if it has a name on this brand. No, of course. Oh, wait, what does it?
I think I just lost this.
I don't know. It says ES Innovations on it. I don't know if that's the brand name or not, though. But Amazon, they're inexpensive. I think they're like 20 bucks. They're not that expensive. Let's see. What is my favorite company for binders? I really like Cellcore binders. They make a product called Biotoxin Binder. They also have GI Detox and HMET. So if you're dealing with mold and metals, HMET is a really great binder for both. Biotoxin Binder is really nice and gentle, and it has some fluvic acid in it, so it helps with the constipation. Dr. Jill Krista just came out with a new binder. She actually is formulating her own products with a company locally here in Wisconsin. And she uses a binder that's a aloe vera binder. What's the name of it? I think I have it sitting here somewhere. It's called Gentle Bind. And it is from a company called All Light, so ALIGHT, Health Formulas. And that's a really nice binder too. It's just simply aloe vera. So if people are really constipated from binders, aloe vera can be helpful. Or if you have acid reflux and a lot of GI issues from the mycotoxins, that aloe vera product can be really nice. The nail fungus, yes. On Guard or doTERRA, you just put like a drop on the nail, rub it on the whole nail, rub it all on there. Try to get a little bit underneath the tip just by rubbing it like this. Do it every day for about 12 weeks. It'll be gone. On Guard is from doTERRA, so you can buy it directly from doTERRA. We stock it here as well. Thieves Oil comes from Young Living, same type of thing. They're both multi-level marketing companies, but you can buy them online as well. And again, we stock them here. The essential oil nasal spray, we actually make in our office with a combination. We have 3 different formulas, so you can buy that from us as well. So my toilet has been leaking into your unfinished basement. Oh no, I'm so sorry. How do you find out if it has caused mold growth? Plumbers are coming tomorrow, and I'm guessing that they will poo-poo the idea of mold growth. Yes, they will. You had mold in that area in the basement 18 months ago and remediated it. One thing I would do is once they stop the leak, I would spray essential oils in that area. If you want to test, you can do a test a couple of ways. If you don't see any discoloration, nothing black, nothing green, nothing white, you can, well, even if you do see it, you could swab the area where it's leaking too. So if it's leaking onto drywall, just take a swab that you can order from Immunolytics. They'll send it to you. And then just wipe that area down and send it out. And then I would do a plate test too. I would put a plate in that area and capture the air and send both of them out to test. And then you would know. And then as soon as you're done testing, spray like the essential oils with vinegar or the EC3, spray that in that whole area, put a fan on that, really dry it out good. Make sure the humidity is really low in the basement, and then that'll help to kill that mold if it is growing. Awesome. Does an infrared light sauna help to detox mold? Yes, it does. And it will accentuate anything that we're doing for mold or Lyme treatment. So if we're treating you for those things, it'll accentuate that treatment. Dr. Horowitz will say sometimes it increases it 5 to 10 fold. So it can make things better. It's going to help you detox, remove toxins, chemicals, VOCs, all of that. It'll help get that out. Will a pressure cooker kill mold? Probably not. It depends sometimes, but we know it's heat resistant. It depends on what type of mold it is. What is the name of the homeopathic medication? So there's a couple of different ones. Nux vomica is one. There are a couple of different products from Bio as well that kill mold. There's actually homeopathic formulas from them already created versus having to try to find single ones. And if you have Lyme, what can you do to combat mold? You do the same thing that we've talked about all night. Even if you have Lyme, you have to do them both together. No doubt. So awesome. So we got all of the questions. We got through a long night.